Furthermore, yung DICT powers and functions. So, additional lang po, we have the policy and planning, improve public access. So, we have the free Wi-Fi project for this. Meron tayong resource sharing and capacity building. Meron tayong projects such as yung Tech for Ed, tsaka yung ILCTB. Sila po yung nagfo-focus on the capacity building for our stakeholders. Meron din tayong consumer protection and industry development. Meron tayong cybersecurity policy and program coordination. Nandyan po yung ating Cybersecurity Bureau. At meron tayong countryside development. So ito po yung sakop ng DICT. And marami pa tayong projects, programs, and services na offered to the public for free po. And next, ito po yung ating Cybersecurity Bureau. Merong tatlong divisions po under this. First is the NCERT or the National Computer Emergency Response Team. Meron tayong DCD or the Digital Certificate Division. At meron tayong CIE-CSM. This is the Critical Infrastructure Evaluation and Cybersecurity Standards Monitoring. And yung PNPKI po natin, this is under the DCD or the Digital Certificate Division. And before po mapunta sa DICT yung function na to, this is under the DOST pa po. So sa DOST, nagkaroon tayo ng ICT office. And sila po yung naging responsible before sa pag-issue ng digital certificates. And meron tayong PNPKI team support channel. So dati kasi meron kaming lc2.support.pnpki team. Ito, ang sakop po namin is both Region 3 and Region 4A. Although dahil po nagkaroon kami ng regionalization last April, naging Region 3 na lang po yung sakop namin. So ito po yung support channel na namin ngayon, r3.pnpki at dict.gov.ph. And for this morning po, ang points of discussion natin. First, what is PNPKI? Ano ba yung digital certificates? Ano yung benefits ng PNPKI? Legal basis natin, and yung application requirements and process natin. And syempre po, meron tayong mga articles. Ano ba yung PNPKI? Bakit ba siya lumabas? So meron mga articles before and memorandum na lumabas. This is sabi po dito, the DICT provides secure digital certificates to the public. Meron tayong government offices urged to use the DICT service for electronic transactions. So lumabas po dito yung mandate ng DICT to provide the use of digital certificates. Yan. From the PIA, DICT offers Philippine National Public Key Infrastructure to government offices. PTV News, sabi, nag-offer din ng PNPKI to government offices. And Business World, DICT offers DOJ naman the use of PNPKI digital certificates. So, ang naging aim talaga natin dito is the digitization of government services in the new normal. So ano ba yung, pag sinabi mong digitization, paano ba yun? Pag sinabi mong new normal, di ba aware naman tayo, ang new normal, ito yung naging setup natin during the pandemic. So actually, hindi pa talaga tapos yung COVID-19, di ba? Meron pa rin mga cases ngayon. So sa ano po, may mga na-encounter kasi tayo mga scenarios before talaga ma-fully implement yung PNPKI. First, we have too many steps. Pag pumunta po kayo sa munisipyo, makikita nyo sobrang daming windows at bawat window na yon meron tayong kanya-kanyang steps. So for this picture po, makikita natin sa step 8, ito na yung receiving natin ng permits or clearances. Yan po. Kada window, meron silang queuing system. Kaso ayun nga, bawat window, pipila pa rin tayo. Yan. So, too many steps dito. And yung naging solution po ng DICT dito is nakapag-develop po ng electronic business permits and licensing system. Ito po yung project na hawak ko before. So, dito sa EBPLS, nag-a-allow na tayo ng business owners to apply online. Pwede silang mag-apply or renew ng kanilang business permits online. So, hindi lahat ng LGUs gumagamit ng EPPLS kasi yung ibang LGU, meron silang sariling system or nakapag-develop or nakabili sila ng sarili nilang system before. So, pero karamihan sa LGUs natin sa Region 3, EPPLS na po yung gamit. Pag EPPLS po, pwede natin itong ma-access online. Ayan. So, ang goal natin is online na rin yung ating transaction electronically. Hindi na sana tayo pupunta sa LGU para mag-apply. Pwede na online. And next naman na scenario is long lines. Alam na alam natin to. Kapag pumupunta tayo sa government offices, sobrang haba ng pinipila natin palagi. Ayan. So, for example, yung sa NBI clearance natin, kapag magsisecure tayo ng clearance, ang haba ng pinipila natin. At kadalasan po, hindi pa natin nakukuha yan within the day. Paano pa kapag meron pa kayong hit, di ba? Ayan. So, sa long lines po, dahil nga pumipila-pila pa tayo, kung meron ka ng NBI clearance before, much better kung i-renew nyo na lang po yun. At meron tayo doon na online, ayan, NBI clearance online, pwede kayo mag-register dito. Pwede rin kayo mag-renew ng NBI clearance nyo kung expired na po. Ayan, pwede nyo ipasok na lang yung date ng old NBI number at pwede nyo pong i-renew yun. Yan yung solution natin. At sa scenario number 3, ito po naman yung fraud documents. So alam natin merong isang lugar sa Maynila kung saan all your dreams can come true. Bakit? Kasi yung mga documents dito pwede nating ipagawa. Pwede tayong, kung gusto nating magkaroon ng diploma, pwede tayong magpagawa dito. Kung gusto natin ng transcript of records, pwede rin dito. Birth certificate or any kind of certificate or clearances na kailangan natin. Kung gusto rin natin ng mga IDs, ganyan, resibo, diploma, marriage certificate, pwede rin dito. Yan, student card, press card. So, sino pong nakakaalam ng lugar na to? So, kung gusto natin ng driving license, degree, magkakaroon ka ng degree within the day. Ayan. So, ito po, lugar sa Maynila, all your dreams can come true. Ang tawag dito is Recto University kasi within the day, pwede ka magkaroon ng diploma. And meron tayo dito, isang article, last 2018, sabi po ay barangay officials jailed for falsification. Sila po ay napakulong kasi nag-forge sila ng 5 barangay resolutions. So, ang scenario number 3 natin ay fraud documents. So, ang solution dito is nagkaroon tayo ng additional features sa mga documents natin. So, nagkaroon ng mga barcode, na uso yung QR code. Ayan. Tapos, meron pa tayong OCR. And yung last po is yung digital signature. So, paano natin ma-ensure na hindi na fraud, hindi na forge yung isang document? Ayan. Pwede nating i-attach yung ating digital signature. So, later on, mas ma-explain pa natin to. And last na scenario natin is the work from home dahil sa enhanced community quarantine. Yung iba sa atin naka-experience po ng work from home. Yung iba naman naka-skeletal pero 1 week lang. Tapos the following week, iba naman yung naka-skeletal. So ito po yung ating scenario. Di ba po medyo mahirap magtrabaho sa bahay. Siyempre madami kang distractions, ganyan. Paano yung mga documents na ipapasa mo? Di ba minsan kailangan mo yung hard copy ipapasa sa office. So mahirap naman po yung ganon. And yung naging solution natin dito is dahil nga yung mga documents kailangan pirmado natin, pwede naman ngayon na mag-secure tayo ng digital certificate na tinatawag. So last 2020, nagkaroon po ng Department Circular last April 2020. Ang sabi dito is the guidelines on the application and issuance of PNPKI digital certificates for external clients during the state of public health emergency. So dahil nga nagkaroon tayo ng pandemic, nagkaroon tayo ng work from home, ganyan, pina-implement sa atin yung paggamit ng digital certificates. Yan. So si DICT po yung nag-provide niyan. And na-urge din or na-push din yung ibang government offices na mag-implement po nito. So first, what is PNPKI? So ang uunahin natin dito is yung PKI. Yan. Pag sinabing PNPKI, ito yung Philippine National PKI. Ano muna yung PKI? Yung P stands for public. Ibig sabihin dito is na-share natin sa public yung isang information. This is shared to the public. Pag sinabing key, di ba, pag naisip nyo po yung key, maiisip natin yung susi na pinapa-unlock natin ng padlock, ganyan, o kaya yung mga doorknob natin. So key, meron tayong susi. And yung infrastructure, ito yung consists of policies, structures, and manpower po to implement the PKI. So yung PKI, ito po yung general term natin. Yung PKI is the general or generic term. This is widely used worldwide po. Kapag naman sinabing PNPKI, ito yung branding natin na Philippine National PKI. Ito yung standard natin sa Philippines. Ayan. And PKI enables risks to be properly managed so that electronic transactions can be performed on open, insecure networks such as the internet. So, ang main components natin dito is the cryptography. Cryptography, pag sinabing cryptography, ito yung means natin to hide an information, to lock or secure an information. Kapag naman sinabing digital certificate, ito yung kapartner ng ating cryptography kung saan sa digital certificates nandito yung ating identity as the user to ensure na itong document na to ay authenticated at siya yung mismong pirmado ng user or subscriber. So, 2-in-1 to. Kapag meron tayong PKI, syempre meron tayong dalawang components na nag-work together sila. Meron tayong cryptography na nag-hide or nagsisecure ng data. And meron tayong digital certificates, yung identity natin as the user of the PKI. So more of this later. And meron akong audiovisual presentation. So ulitin ko lang po yung aking sharing. And wait lang po. Share ko lang yung audio. Then pa-message po sa akin kung maririnig niyo yung audio ng EVP. And rinig po ba? And pa-message po kung rinig yung ating EVP.
Many
And yes, thank you po sa mga sumagot.
Many are unaware of the dangers lurking on the internet. Fraud, identity theft, and data tampering are the common security issues faced by users. As government agencies increasingly shift their services online, the need to address these issues and provide mechanisms for a safe, time-efficient, and cost-efficient online services and assistance to the public also increases. To attain a higher level of security for online transactions, the DICT Cybersecurity Bureau is implementing a Public Key Infrastructure or PKI. It is the key for digital security. It uses state-of-the-art cryptography and digital certificates for digital signing and encryption. These two components are the primary instruments of PKI that ensures identification and authentication of users of applications. PKI uses both public and private keys. One key locks and the other unlocks. Imagine a set of lockers at a public pool. One key, a public key, is given to the customer to lock a compartment. To prevent the customer from forgetting to return the key after use, the locker can only be opened with a master key. The private key which is held by the owner. The digital keys work hand in hand to ensure digital security. The public key is used to encrypt the file while the private key is used to decrypt it, and only the right digital certificate can open the information encrypted with PKI. Digital signing. When a user with a PKI token digitally signs a document or email, the intended recipient can be assured that the information within that document was created by the person whom the message was from and that it is safe to open. Encryption. Another feature of PKI is the ability of a user to secure information within a document by encrypting it. The encrypted document cannot be decrypted or altered by anyone without a private key. This means that the information is safe during transmission and storage. Validation. The ability to use the information within the digital certificate for validation services is another important feature of PKI. The digital certificate contains reliable information about the owner's name, birth date, public key, and the date of issuance and expiration of the certificate itself. When users avail of government online services, digital certificates play a major role in the application and verification process. The information within the digital certificate can be used to ensure that a transaction is being done by the right person. Traditionally, when transacting with the government, one has to physically appear and present a valid ID to confirm one's identity. With online transactions, there is no need to go to the government office and present a valid ID. Your PKI is your online valid ID. With citizens being able to transact with the government online, there is no need to go to government offices and spend so much time in long queues, saving them time, effort, and expenses with these services. PKI-enabled the public can now trust online transactions. How to get a digital certificate? Digital certificates are created by a trusted certificate authority. As mandated by law, the root certificate authority will be the Department of Information and Communications Technology. This means that all digital certificates will come from DICT. The citizens and the government employees can get their PKI tokens at Certified Registration Authorities, or RAs. Initially, RAs, as defined by the project, will be the four agencies implementing the Unified Multi-Purpose ID, or UMID. SSS, GSIS, Full Health, and PAG-EBIG. Other RAs will be identified later. With PKI, the goals of achieving secured networks and online data exchange will be achieved.
So, ayun po, tapos na yung ating audiovisual presentation. And ayun po yung pangarap natin, no? Yung hindi na tayo palaging nagdadala ng ating valid ID. Ang goal talaga ng PNPKI sa atin is eventually po, once na fully implemented yan sa Pilipinas, is yun na lang yung gagamitin natin to apply or renew our licenses, yung IDs natin, ganyan. So hopefully po, madami na makapag-implement na PNPKI, and in the near future po, makapag-implement tayo ng ganito. So meron tayong mga agencies na involved pa or partners pa natin sa pag-implement ng PNPKI. However, meron pa mga further planning pa dyan and testing po before tayo maka-fully implement. Pero habang maaga po, dapat makapag-apply na rin tayo for PNPKI. Okay? And so madami tayong na-encounters na terms dito sa ating audiovisual presentation. So i-explain na lang din natin na ito. And for the first slide po, first na term natin, what is a regular certificate? Pag sinabi niyo pong certificate, ano ba yung naiisip niyo kagad? Diba, usually ang certificate, pwede yan sa orientation, may certificate sa training, meron pang birth certificate. So ano ba yung full definition natin for the certificate? So pag sinabi ditong document, certificate, this is a document containing or certifying the truth of something. So for example po, meron kayong birth certificate. Ito yung nagpo-proof na pinanganak ka na ganito yung pangalan mo, ito yung birthday mo, dito yung birthplace mo, ito yung mga magulang mo. So yun po yung sa birth certificate natin. Kapag naman training certificate, yun yung nagpo-prove na tayo ay nakakompleto ng isang training, nakaabot tayo sa dulo, napasa natin lahat ng certificates, lahat ng exercises natin para makakuha tayo ng certificate. So yun po. Kapag naman sa orientation, nagkaroon tayo ng certificate dahil umabot din tayo hanggang dulo na nasagutan natin yung post-eval. So for this webinar po, make sure na makakapag-post-eval kayo later para magkaroon kayo ng certificate for this webinar. Yan. Ito po yung general definition natin for a regular certificate. Now, what is a digital certificate? Ito yung na-encounter natin na term dun sa ating audiovisual presentation. Ano nga ba yung digital certificate? Ito po ay very small file issued ng Certificate Authority or yung CA natin. Ang CA po is yung DICT. Ang digital certificate kasi yung nag-ensure ng proof of an individual or machine's electronic identity. So para siyang passport, electronic passport that allows a person or computer to exchange information over the internet. So again, ang regular certificate, this is a general term na pinoprove natin na tama or totoo yung isang bagay. Whereas, kapag digital certificate naman, ito yung ating electronic passport na nag-e-ensure or nagpo-prove ng ating electronic identity. Small file lang po yan, parang 10 KB lang po siya. So pag in-install natin yan sa ating computer, maliit lang po yung masasakop niya, pero magagamit natin siya to sign documents or emails. So next is, what is a digital signature? What is an electronic signature? Or another term po ito. Pag sinabing electronic signature, di ba ang naiisip kagad natin is yung picture, yung PNG ng ating pirma. Yun agad yung naiisip natin. Ito yung ina-attach natin sa isang document. Kunwari may kontrata tayo, pwede nating ilagay yung electronic signature natin. O kaya may letter, meron tayong invitation letter, pwede nating i-attach yung electronic signature natin. Usually po, ang ginagamit natin is PNG file lamang or picture ng ating pirma. Pero ang totoong definition talaga ng electronic signature, this is electronic symbol, sound, or process na ina-attach natin sa isang document. This is any mark. Pag sinabing any mark, pwedeng yung pangalan natin, basta ilagay natin sa isang document, yun ay considered as electronic signature. Kapag naman checkbox, meron tayo na tick na checkbox, ibig sabihin may electronic signature natin. Kasi ang sabi dito, ang electronic signature is any mark on a document that can capture the intent of the signer to approve or accept the contents. So kunwari may document tayo dyan, kapag nilagay natin yung full name natin dyan, this is already considered as electronic signature. O kapag sa sa Google Forms naman, kapag nilagay natin yung mga details natin doon, yun ay considered as electronic signature na agad. Yan po yung general definition natin. This is any mark. Tatandaan nyo po, this is any mark on a document para ma-ensure na na-approve or accept natin yung content or yung laman po ng isang document. Ayan. Ito po yung electronic signature. Ano naman kapag sinabing digital signature? Ang digital signature ay isang klase ng electronic signature. Pero ano ba yung pinagkaiba nila? Sa digital signature naman, meron tayong mathematical scheme to verify the authenticity, integrity, non-repudiation of a message. So meron na tayong authentication na kapartner ni digital signature. So pag pinirmahan natin yung isang document using our digital signature, ma-check natin kung sino ba yung identity. Ano ba yung identity ng person na pumirma dito sa document na to. Yan. Makikita natin yung kanyang identity. So, mapoprove natin na ito, sa akin galing mismo yung isang document. Pirmado ko mismo. Hindi inattach ng ibang tao. 'Di ba ang nakasanayan natin is kapag may pirma ka ng boss mo, kapag meron kang PNG file ng electronic signature ng boss mo or supervisor mo, tapos inutusan ka o attach mo yung yung pirma ko diyan sa invitation letter. 'Di ba ina-attach lang, ini-insert lang natin yung pirma niya. Ganun lang. So hindi natin matitrace sino ba yung nag-attach ng pirma ni supervisor or ni boss sa isang document. Diba? Hindi natin matitrace back kung sino ba yung nag-attach ng pirma ko dito. Whereas, kapag digital signature naman, pwede nating ma-prove, pwede natin makita kung sino ba talaga yung pumirma sa isang document. Yan, digital signature. So, wag po kayong malilito dito. Kasi ang digital signature, isang klase ng electronic signature. Pero dito, may kapartner na siya na mathematical scheme kung saan ma-authenticate na natin yung isang document or message. So, meron tayong isang buong bilog. Di ba, by definition natin kanina, ang electronic signature is any mark on a document. So first, nakasanayan natin yung pag-attach ng picture ng ating pirma. Yan, considered as electronic signature yan. Pero by definition, this is any mark on a document. So pwedeng checkbox, considered na rin yan as electronic signature. Pwede rin yung biometrics, yung fingerprint natin. Pag in-attach, this is already considered as electronic signature. Or yung pinakasimple, ilagay lang natin yung isang pangalan natin doon sa isang document, this is already considered as electronic signature. So within this circle po, meron tayong subclass kung saan yung digital signature, ayan, ang digital signature ay isang klase ng electronic signature, pero dito sa digital signature, meron na tayong authentication. Meron na tayong, dito papasok yung cryptography and digital certificates. And sa cryptography po na i-ensure natin na isang document ay authentic, pwede nating matrace kung sino yung pumirma doon sa document na yon. Ayan. So, wait na po. Hindi ko muna hayaang mag-mute ay mag-unmute yung iba. So, ito po. Tatandaan niyo po itong bilog na to. Itong pinakamalaki, this is the electronic signature. At isang klase ng electronic signature is digital signature. Ngayon po, baka magkalito kayo or ma-interchange nyo yung topic natin. So, pag sinabing digital certificate, babalikan natin. Pag sinabing digital certificate, ayun yung ating electronic passport or yung ating electronic identity. Pag sinabing digital signature, ito yung ating pirma na mayroong authentication. Yan. Ito yung way natin to implement the electronic signature. So mamaya po, meron tayong demonstration for the signing of the document. So next ko lang po, type of a digital signature. Ayan. Ang type of a digital signature, first is an individual certificate. Pag individual certificate, kunwari po kayo, naisipan nyo mag-apply sa amin ng PNPKI nyo. So, buy one, take one po yan. Kapag nag-apply po kayo, dalawa po yung makukuha nyong digital certificate. First is the authentication. Pag sinabing authentication, ito yung ginagamit natin for email authentication. And yung signing certificate naman natin, ito yung ginagamit natin to digitally sign a document. Tapos may sample tayo dito, digitally signed by Marquez Koji. Meron siyang firma dito behind the smiley. Tapos meron siyang date and time kung kailan siya pumirma. Tapos meron tayong mga may details tayo dito. Once na-click natin tong digital signature niya, lalabas yung kanyang digital certificate. So sa digital certificate, again, ito yung ating identity as the user or subscriber. So lalabas yung kanyang full name, yung organization niya, for example, is ROO, Luzon Cluster 2, issued by Gov Signing CA, which is DOST pa po nakapangalan. And meron siyang validity po, 2 years ito. And yung intended usage natin is non-repudiation. Ayan. Next is yung agency certificate. So pag sinabi yung agency certificate, meron tayong nakapangalan dun sa mismong agency. For this example po, CPS Policy Authority, ito yung kanyang agency certificate. So may pumirma po in behalf of the CPS Policy Authority. So in behalf of the agency, kaya tayo pumirma dun sa isang document. Ayan. Usually yung mga joint memorandum circular, ganyan, pwede silang gumamit ng agency certificate para doon. Yung ating SSL certificate, so mapapansin nyo po, may green na padlock kapag na-visit nyo po yung https://dict.gov.ph. Pag na-click natin tong SSL certificate, may lalabas na view information or view certificate. At ito po yung magre-reflect. This certificate is intended for the following purpose: to ensure the identity of a remote computer and to prove your identity to a remote computer. Issued siya doon sa website ng DICT, and meron tayong CA dito, or the Certificate Authority, which is the CETIGO RSA Organization Validation Secure Server. Tapos, ang validity nito is 1 year lang po. So, may ensure natin na ang isang website is secured kapag meron tayong SSL certificate. And first, meron tayo, what is PKI used for? PKI provides the mechanism for trusted online relationship by ensuring the security of a digital data and transactions by providing the following. So, tatandaan natin itong apat na to. We have the authentication, confidentiality, integrity, and non-repudiation. So, ano nga ba yung apat na to? Ito yung ating benefits sa paggamit ng PKI. First po is the authentication. So, may ensure natin na isang document ay authentic kasi this is valid, or the signature is valid dun sa isang document na yun. So parang sa ano po, parang kapag meron tayong document na pinirmahan po natin at na-secure naman natin yung ating identity dun sa computer, magre-reflect dun sa atin na the signature is valid. It is signed by Vizcara Cheryl Ann Bilag, and yung signing time dito ay naka-reflect naman po, kunwari ay June 10, 2019. Ayan. So, ito po sa authentication. Then, next naman po is yung confidentiality. Sa confidentiality po, dito papasok yung na-discuss dun sa ating audiovisual presentation, yung concept ng ating public key at yung private key. Pag sinabing private key, yun yung ginagamit natin to lock a document. Kapag sinabi nating private key, yun yung isang ginagamit natin to unlock a document. So for example po, sa susiin natin, may sinecure tayo na isang message. So hindi siya pwedeng ma-decrypt ng ibang tao kasi only your private key can be used to unlock a message that is locked by your public key. So, meron tayong concept ng public key and private key. Ito po, ginagamit natin sa email signing. And kapag may nilock tayo na email, doon po papasok yung private and public key natin. Pero sa document signing, yun yung mas gamit natin sa sa office works, yung document signing talaga natin. Yung yung sa email signing, not so much. Kasi usual naman siya. Ayan. So next naman is yung integrity. Pag sinabi naman natin integrity, kasi nga meron tayong identity doon as the user, may ensure natin na itong document na to ay galing talaga doon sa mismong tao sa naka-reflect ng user doon, na pangalan doon ng signer natin. So we have two parts. First is the document signing po. Pag document signing at naklik natin yung mismong firma, sasabihin naman po dito that the signature is valid and signed by the user. For example, is Vizcara, Cheryl, and Bilag. And the document has not been modified since the signature was applied. The document is signed by the current user. So pag sinabi mo integrity, magre-reflect dito na kapag ang document ba ay nandun pa rin siya sa original state niya. Hindi siya na-tamper, hindi siya na-alter, hindi siya na-edit ng kung sino man. In cases na kapag may inedit pa sa document after ma-digitally sign ng isang tao, magre-reflect yun na may edits dito sa document na yun. So later on, ipapakita rin natin. For the email signing po, magre-reflect naman din dun sa email na authenticate natin that this message is signed. This message includes a valid digital signature. The message has not been altered since it was sent. So wala tayong changes dun sa message na yun kasi nandun pa siya sa original state niya after siya ma-sign ng isang tao. So for example, signed by Vizcara, Cheryl, and Bilag. Ang email address niya, Vizcara, cheryl.vizcara@gmail.com, and certificate issued by the Gov Authentication CA. At may option tayo to view the signature certificate. So again po, sa document signing, ang gamit natin dito is the signing certificate. And for email signing, ang gamit naman natin dito is the authentication certificate. And last po, yung benefit pa natin dito is the non-repudiation. Ito yung naka-reflect dun sa ating certificate. So, ang intended usage nito is non-repudiation. Ano ba pag sinabi nating non-repudiation? So, we cannot deny na tayo yung pumirma sa isang document kasi nandun yung ating identity. So, in cases na ang isang document ay umabot sa isang kaso, nagamit yung document na yon sa isang court case, tapos napirmahan natin yung document na yon, hindi tayo pwedeng mag-deny na tayo yung pumirma doon sa isang document kasi andun yung ating identity as the user. Kaya dapat po, kapag meron kayong digital certificate, i-install nyo lang po yun sa ginagamit nyong laptop, ginagamit nyong computer. Huwag nyo sana siyang ipapagamit sa ibang tao. Kasi paano kapag may kontrata tapos may isang kontrata tapos pinirmahan ng ibang tao gamit yung digital signature nyo, edi syempre hindi nyo madedenay na kayo yung pumirma doon kasi andun na yung identity nyo. So non-repudiation po, kayo pa rin yung responsible as the user or subscriber of the digital certificate. So kayo po, dapat kayo lang dapat yung gagamit ng inyong digital certificate. So for example, dun sa aming director, meron siyang, madami siyang pinipirmahan na documents, kaso kahit sobrang dami yun, siya pa rin ang gumagamit. At kahit meron siyang, kunwari may assistant siya, pwede man niyang ipagamit pero hindi niya pinapagamit kasi sa kanya lang dapat yun. Kayo lang dapat po yung gumagamit nun. Para siyang bank account na kailangan kayo lang po yung may access. Para siyang password na kailangan kayo lang yung may access. Hindi niyo po dapat ipagamit kung kanino man. Kasi ang intended usage nito is non-repudiation. Hindi na natin pwedeng ma-deny na tayo yung pumirma sa isang document kasi andun yung ating identity as the user or subscriber. Kaya meron tayong subscribers agreement. Kailangan babasahin natin yon kapag nag-apply tayo dun sa PNPKI. Ayan. Ulit po ako Dapat tayo lang yung gumagamit ng ating digital certificate. Huwag natin siyang ipapagamit sa isang shared na laptop or computer kung kanino man. Yan. Kasi baka kung sino po maka-access ng digital certificate nyo, mamaya may loan na pala kayo, hindi nyo alam, pirmado nyo na pala. Ayan. Huwag niyo pong ipapagamit kung kanino man. And what's up now? Meron tayong mga legal basis dito na supporting yung ating PNPKI. First, sabi dito from the ARTA, kasi sa ARTA meron tayong pina-implement diba na ease of doing business law. Ayan. At sabi po dito is nag-propose naman na maging mandatory yung paggamit ng digital signature sa ating national government agencies. So para nga ma-implement natin yung ease of doing business, bawasan na natin yung signatories sa isang document. Tapos, napupush na rin yung paggamit ng digital signature para mas mapabilis natin yung proseso. Sabi rin dito, yung COA daw ay nag-draft na ng circular para ma-recognize yung paggamit ng digital signature. So later on po ito. And nagkaroon po from the COMELEC policy guidelines on the implementation of digital certificate for the national and local elections. Actually, nangarag kami nung kailan kasi na-implement natin itong sa COMELEC po. So may mga teachers tayo na involved dun sa national and local elections. Sila po pinag-apply sa PNPKI para yung token po nila, yung certificate nila, yun yung ginamit during the election po. And meron tayo dito from the COA, September 6, 2021. Meron silang circular number 2021-006, guidelines on the use of electronic documents, electronic signatures, and digital signatures in government transactions. Meron din tayo ditong OWA memo, application of field offices and school personnel for PNPKI digital signature dated July 16, 2021. So yung DepEd po nakiteam up sa amin, nag-request sila ng batch application. So mas napabilis yung proseso namin para magkaroon sila ng digital certificate po. Ayan. More than 900,000 kasi yung employees na pinag-apply nila. And marami na rin pong na-issuean. And until now, may mga pinaprocess pa rin na batch application yung aming central office. And meron tayo dito, legal basis for the electronic signature. So, ang batas talaga natin dito is the Electronic Commerce Act of 2000. Imagine 2000, 22 years ago, meron na tayong RA 8792. So sabi po sa Section 7, Legal Recognition of Electronic Documents, ang electronic document shall be functional equivalent of a written document under existing law. So nagagamit natin as evidence yung electronic documents kasi magka-equivalent na or parehas na sila ng function. Ayan. Parehas na sila ng function ng written document or printed na documents. So considered na as evidence yan. And sa Section 8 naman, legal recognition of electronic signature. Sabi naman sa electronic signature, ito ay functional equivalent din ng signature of a person on a written document. So meron man tayong hard copy ng document na meron tayong wet signature, equivalent lang or katumbas lang nun yung electronic signature natin. And legal basis pa natin is yung sa EO 810 series of 2009, application of digital signatures in e-government services. Ang sabi doon, yung mga government agencies na merong electronic services, dapat ma-require na rin yung paggamit ng digital signature sa service na yon. So, dapat na i-implement na rin to ng government offices. And Supreme Court rules on electronic evidence, sabi nga ulit is yung electronic signature or a digital signature authenticated in the manner prescribed hereunder is admissible as evidence as the functional equivalent of the signature of a person on a written document. Equivalent na siya as evidence. Kaya mag-iingat tayo sa paggamit ng ating electronic signature po kasi considered na yan as evidence. Meron tayo dito from the GPPB or the Government Procurement Policy Board, nag-a-allow na sila or nag-approve na sila ng paggamit ng digital signature in procurement-related documents. So, di ba nga po, naka-work from home yung iba dati. Kaya medyo mahirap yung sa procurement natin. Kasi ang nakasanayan is kailangan i-print muna, wet signature, tapos papasa sa another person under the back. Ipirmahan na naman nila, pasa-pasa, ganyan. And dito sa GPPB, na-allow na nila yung paggamit ng digital signature sa procurement-related documents. Meron tayong mga documents dito. So for example is yung annual procurement plan, request for quotation, request for proposal. Ayan po, nakalista po yan lahat. And sa COA Circular 2020-009, ito yung temporary relaxation in application of certain provisions of COA Circular number 2014-002. So dahil nga po na-declare na state of calamity dito sa Pilipinas, dahil nga madaming naka-quarantine po, and na-approve na nila, sabi dito, recipient agencies may submit electronically generated reports through email basta na certify na itong reports na to ay accurate at correct yung content. Ayan. So, inallow na po yung paggamit ng electronically signed documents. And sa ARTA po, meron tayong Circular 2020-06, Guidelines on the Issuance and or Reinstitution of Permits and Licenses under the New Normal. So, si ARTA talaga yung nag-push nito. So, may part kasi dito na nag-reduce na tayo ng signatories dun sa ating documents. So, dapat daw ay maximum of 3 signatories na lang yung pipirma dun sa isang document. Tapos, na encourage na rin yung paggamit ng electronic signature, such as the PNPKI of DICT. So, pwede na po yan, electronic signature or pre-signed licenses. And kasi nga, pinabawasan natin yung processing time natin, pinapabilis natin yung proseso para makukuha agad ng clients yung ating documents. Okay? And sa traditional workflow natin, ganito talaga siya. So for example, may nagawa tayong isang document po. Kunwari, naggamit tayo sa Word. Ayan. Sa Word document, nag-prepare tayo ng invitation letter, example. Then sa invitation letter, print natin siya. Pagka-print, binigay natin yan sa supervisor natin para sa signature. Tapos may napansin po yung ating supervisor, oh, mali ito, correct mo to, revise mo to, ganyan-ganyan. Pabalik tayo dun sa soft copy natin, e-edit, gagawin yung revisions, tapos ipiprint ulit yung document. So pag pinasign natin ulit yan, ay may mapapansin na naman for correction, o edit mo na naman to, revise mo na naman to, yung ganyan-ganyan. E di babalik na naman tayo sa soft copy, tapos ipiprint natin hanggang sa maging final yung isang document. Pag tanggap na or correct na yung document na yun, pipirmahan ng ating supervisor, saka pa lang natin siya pwedeng i-scan. At once na na-scan natin yung invitation letter na yun, saka pa lang natin siya pwedeng i-share or email. Yan. Pwedeng i-email or ipapadala natin sa intended recipient natin. So for example, may kapartner tayo na agency, papadala natin sa kanila. So ganito po yung traditional workflow natin sa government. So paulit-ulit, actually medyo sayang yung papel natin dito kasi lalo na kapag marami pang revisions dun sa document na yun, paulit-ulit po. Pero kapag gumamit naman tayo ng digital signature, ganito po yung ating workflow na pag nag-create tayo ng document, at pinapirmahan natin, kung may revisions man yan, okay lang, balik lang tayo doon sa may soft copy natin ng document, edit natin, revise natin yung document na yon, then save or print natin as PDF, then send ulit natin kay supervisor yung for signature niya. At once na napirmahan po yan ng ating supervisor, saka natin siya pwedeng i-share or email natin doon sa intended recipient. So kung mapapansin niyo po, nabawasan yung steps natin. Ang natanggal po dito is yung print at yung sign. So paperless natin yung paperless na po yung ating transaction. Ayan. And yung PNPKI partners na lang po, we have the SEC or the Security and Exchange Commission, yung COMELEC natin. Yung archives ng Davao, yung SSS, TESDA, tapos yung Quezon Province, and Division of Quezon Tayabas City. Tapos may mga coordination na tayo sa ibang agencies, although nadagdagan po yung natin, yung listahan ng PNPKI partners natin dito. Meron tayong Region 3 partners, for example, yung sa DepEd, DTI, DENR, TESDA, SSS, COMELEC, yung mga schools divisions po doon. So, for the application requirements, yan, meron tayong PNPKI application requirements. So, dahil po agencies yung mga nag-apply dito, ay mga naka-join dito for today, may option naman tayo dito to apply for batch application na lang. So kung kung balak nyo pong mag-apply for batch application, mas mabilis naman din yun, tapos isahang process din sa side ng central office. Pero kung individual application po, syempre, kailangan natin mag-prepare ng application form. Ang personal appearance natin is online na po. Magsisend na lang ng Zoom link or Google Meet link yung ating RA assistant para sa online verification. At doon nyo po kasi kailangan i-present yung documents or valid IDs na in-upload nyo sa ating site or sa application natin. Ayan. Tapos, kailangan natin ng birth certificate or passport. At kailangan din natin ng UMID or any 2 valid ID. Kung wala kayong UMID, any 2 valid ID po. At kailangan natin ng photo taken within the last 6 months. So, latest na photo natin, i-attach kasi ito sa application form. Ito po yung requirements natin. And for the batch application po, pag-uusapan natin to in case na may agency dito na naka-join at balak nyo pong mag-batch application, syempre may option tayo to request the waiving of documentary requirements and online verification. Dapat may HR certification tayo that certifies all personnel in batch encoding are correct. Meron tayong batch encoding file, naka-Excel format po yun. At yung zip file natin containing all the accomplished application form. Ayan. So, digital signing demonstration lang po. Mag-stop muna ako na sharing para ma-share ko yung aking sample documents po. So, may old document ako. Ito, kunwari ay accomplishment report. And may pangalan ako dito, may kailangan akong pirmahan na portion. Meron tayo dito sa Adobe Acrobat Reader na tools. Ito po, may tools tayo. At meron siya dito part for the certificate. I-click natin si certificate. Pag na-click natin si certificate, meron tayo dito sa may taas, digitally sign. I-click natin tong digitally sign. Tapos, ayan. Tapos, pag na-click natin yung digitally sign, magdodraw lang tayo ng rectangle dito kung saan mag-a-appear yung ating pirma. Nag-draw ako ng rectangle at pipiliin ko lang yung aking signature. So, ang pipiliin ko dito is yung may nakalagay na Gov Signing CA. Yung signing certificate kasi natin yung ginagamit to sign a document. So, nakaselect po ito. Then, continue lang ako. May nag-reflect dito na option. Ito yung lalabas po, kunwari ay Mayel Bermas, digitally signed by Bermas Mariel Ann Alcazar. So ito po, sample pirma lang ito, itong naka-cursive. Tapos pag in-edit ko tong part na to, may option ako to add the date. Pwede kong ilagay yung date. Tapos may option naman dito, location, kaso ayoko yung location. Yung logo na nakalagay dito, ito yung sa Adobe Acrobat naman. So, okay na yung sa name, date, tsaka label. So, pag sinave ko ito, yan, ito po yung magre-reflect, mag-a-appear later on kapag napirmahan na yung document. At kapag naklik ko yung sign, dapat ma-save natin yung ating signed na document. So may option tayo dito to edit the file name. So for example, signed with signature, ganyan. Save ko lang siya as another file. Inedit ko lang yung kanyang file name. Dinagdagan ko ng with signature. Tapos saka ko siya isi-save. Pagka-save po, magre-reflect na dito yung aking pirma. Ito yung aking digital signature. Kapag naklik natin yung digital signature, sabi dito is the signature is valid, signed by Bermas Mariel Ann Alcazar. The document has not been modified since the signature was applied. The document is signed by the current user. Kapag clinic ko po yung signature properties, may lalabas dito na isang window at may option tayo dito to show the signer's certificate. So sa signer's certificate, ito po yung naka-reflect sa akin. Bermas Mariel Ann Alcazar. Ang organization ko is DICT Regional Office 3. Issued by the Gov Signing CA. Nakapangalan pa to sa DOST, although inaayos pa yung change name for this. Valid from March 23, 2022 hanggang March 22 2024. Yan. Ang intended usage natin is non-repudiation. Okay. So, paano naman kapag ang isang document hindi recognize ng aking device yung isang pirma? So, may sample ako dito. Kunwari, ito. Mayroon dito, at least one signature has problem. Magre-reflect dun sa ating application, yung Adobe Reader. Magre-reflect dito kung anong signature yung may problema. So, for this example po, ito, yung pinakauna na revision from Sir Brian Lawrence, ito. Digitally signed niya, tapos recognize ng aking device na yung signature niya is valid. And next po, meron isang signature na may problem. Ito, yung signature na may problem, digitally signed by Senson Wilson. Ito po, signature validity is unknown. So may option tayo dito to set up the signature para ma-recognize siya ng ating device natin. Pag-clinic ko lang to, may option tayo dito to show the signer certificate, tapos ilalagay lang natin siya sa trusted contact or trusted certificate po. So ayan. And magre-reflect naman dito kung may revisions pa dun sa document na yun. Yung kunwari ay may annotation pala, ganyan. So dito po yun sa may Adobe Reader, magre-reflect yung changes natin. Basta ang document is digitally signed, dapat wala na tayong changes dun sa document na yun. Before natin i-save ang isang document as PDF, at before natin siya pirmahan, dapat lahat na ng content ay okay na. Dapat wala na tayong changes dun sa document na yun. Kasi once digitally signed, magre-reflect dito kung may changes pa. Yan po. Miscellaneous changes. Ito po. Ito yung signed version. Tapos magre-reflect naman po dito kung may changes siya dito. Ayan. So, stop sharing na muna ako dito. So, for the questions po, later natin entertain yan. Meron na lang po akong short quiz para sa inyo. Okay? And hopefully po madami pong makapag-participate. Gagamitin na lang natin yung Zoom chat for the questions. Multiple choices naman to. So, ready na po ba kayo? Yung natin, wait lang. Yung ibang questions po, itatabi ko na lang muna. Baka matabunan. Ito po, itatabi lang muna natin. Wait lang. Screenshot ko na lang to para mas mabilis. So later po, i-entertain natin yung questions natin para dun sa sa PNPKI. And may portion naman din tayo yung frequently asked questions. Ayan. Na-screenshot ko yung questions. Then, pa-utilize na lang po yung ating Zoom chat for the pa-utilize na lang yung Zoom chat natin for the quiz po. Short quiz lang naman para makita natin kung sino ba talaga yung nakikinig. Baka mamaya naka-join lang sa ating Zoom tapos hindi pala hindi pala nakikinig o kaya hindi pala nakatutok. Quiz muna tayo. So first question. Question number 1. Question number 1. What does PNPKI stand for? And meron tayong letter A, B, C, D. Yung paunahan na lang po. Ang daming sumasagot. Ang bibilis ng ng chat natin. Kung paulit-ulit ako dito, medyo nakakabulol nga yung PNPKI natin. Okay, saglit lang naman po. So, ang PNPKI natin, okay na po yan. PNPKI natin, this stands for the Philippine National Public Key Infrastructure. So, ang tamang sagot natin ay letter C. So, yung mga nagkamali po, meron ba nagkamali? Kape-kape muna po yung mga nagkamali. Pero, so far, puro C naman po yung yung nakasagot dito. Yan, very good. So, question number 2, what does RA stand for? Sa RA, ano ba yung RA natin? Yan ba ay Republic Act, Registration Authority, Reproductive Act, or Registration Address? Hala, ang daming nalito dito. So sa PNPKI po, meron tayong tinatawag na RA. Ito yung registration authority natin. Sa registration authority or the certificate authority kasi, yan ay binigay na function sa DICT to issue digital certificates. Previously po sa DOST talaga yon. Then, na-transfer yung authority nung nagkaroon na po ng bagong department which is yung DICT Region 3. Ayan. Sabi po namin, B. Bigla nag-change ng answer. Ayan. Thank you po sa mga sumagot. Baka may baka may nagkamali. Pero 'di ba nakasanayan din po natin yung Republic Act. Lagi naman kasing ginagamit yung Republic Act. Pero yung term dito sa PNPKI, ang gamit natin is Registration Authority. So once na nag-apply kayo for PNPKI, may i-assign kasi sa inyo na tinatawag nating RA Assistant or RA Officer. Yung RA Assistant po, yan po yung nagkakandak ng interviews. Kunwari, meron tayong online verification. Sila po yung mag-i-interview sa inyo. Tapos, i-check lang po kung valid ba yung documents, kung correct ba yung nalagay yung details doon sa ating application. Ayan. Sa RA Officer naman, sila po yung mag-ensure sa atin na ang details natin ay tama na. Tapos, sila yung mag-a-approve ng ating application or enrollment certificates natin. So next question po, blank is any mark on a document that can capture the intent of the signer to approve or accept the contents. Ito yung definition natin kanina. Blank is any mark on a document that can capture the intent of the signer to accept the content. Alam, bakit may letter E? Hanggang letter D lang yung ating option. Tingnan nga natin, sino ba yung mga nahilo dito kanina? Okay. So, ang ano natin dito, ang sagot natin dito, so in layman's term kasi, an electronic signature is any mark on a document that can capture the intent of the signer. Yan. Yun yung ano natin, general term natin for the electronic signature. Any mark. Pwede siyang full name natin. Pwedeng yung checkbox lang. Basta naka-checkbox tayo. Ibig sabihin, yun na yung mark natin to approve or accept the contents of a signer. So later on, kapag nag-post tayo, syempre ilalagay natin yung ating details doon. So considered na siya as electronic signature. Kasi by definition, this is any mark on a document. Joke lang. Yan. Next, blank is issued by a certificate authority as proof of an individual's or machine's electronic identity. It is similar to ID cards, passports, and licenses. Hala, lumabas. Scroll lang. Yan, dami sumasagot Mga alert kayo. Ayan. So, dito sa ating sa Zoom chat, ang sinasagot ng karamihan ay letter A, which is the digital certificate. So, tama po kayo dyan. Yung digital certificate kasi natin is issued by the Certificate Authority or the DICT. Ito yung ating individual or electronic identity natin. Individuals or machines electronic identity. So, tama po kayo dyan. Number 5, the following are types of digital certificate except one. Ano kaya dito yung pasaway o saling pusa? So, meron tayong mga digital certificates kanina na naka-present. Ano kaya dito yung saling pusa lang? Alam, bibilis sumagot. Ang daming nakikinig Yan. So, ang tamang sagot po dito, or ang maling hindi klase sa ano talaga. Ang mga digital certificates natin dito, di ba, ay tatlo. First is individual certificate. Second is agency certificate. And yung third po ay yung SSL certificate. So, ang saling pusa lang dito is birth certificate. Hindi po yan kasama sa digital certificate. Example natin yan sa regular certificate. Ano sagot sa question 4? Ang sagot po sa question 4 ay yung digital certificate po. So, balik ko lang dito. So, okay na tayo sa number 5. Yan. Wala namang nalito dito sa number 5. Next is, what are the benefits of PKI? So, medyo matagal to. Ano ba yung 4 na benefits ng PNPKI? Sino kayang tatama dito? Yan. Sino kayang tatama dito? Baka may mga nag-notes po sa inyo. Siyempre, check natin yung notes. May mga sumagot na letter B. Meron naman letter D. Ayan. So, ang sagot po natin dito is yung letter D. Meron tayong authentication, confidentiality, integrity, and non-repudiation. So, medyo inano lang natin to. Minix-mix lang natin to. Baka kasi pag nasulat nyo kasi yan ng sunod-sunod, ganun lang din yung lalabas. So, medyo hinilo natin yan. Nakabaliktad lang po. Ayan. Baka mamaya may undeniable na sumagot. Wala naman. Integration, no. Communication, ginagamit siya for communication pero hindi yan yung benefits natin. So, tatandaan niyo po yung four benefits natin, which is yung authentication, confidentiality, integrity, and non-repudiation. Ayan. And next naman po, number 7, what application can I use to digitally sign a document? Ano kaya ginagamit natin to digitally sign a document? Ayan. So kasi may mga documents tayo, di ba? Pag ginawa natin yung isang letter or memorandum sa isang Word document, pwede ba natin siya pirmahan doon? Kapag ba may grades ako na kailangan i-print, dapat ba sa Excel ko siya ilalagay? And ano ba yung Mozilla Thunderbird? Bakit may naliligaw dito? Okay. So, tingnan ko lang yung chat. Sa ano po, ang karamihan sa sagot dito is letter C, which is the Adobe Reader. Yun din po yung present ko na screen kanina. So sa Adobe Reader kasi, yan yung may feature na certificate, yun yung gagamitin natin as tool to sign a document. Pwede daw sa Word. Actually, sa Word kasi, meron pa dun, pwede pa nating ma-edit yung contents dun. So, hindi talaga recommended na Word yung gagamitin natin for the signature. So, much better kung PDF. Kasi in cases na kapag na-sign natin dun sa PDF yung document, hindi na natin ma-alter talaga yung content. In case na may inedit tayo or dinagdag pa na text dun sa isang document, magre-reflect siya sa Adobe Reader. So, mas okay kung naka-PDF file na yung document before natin i-sign. Yeah. Unlike kapag sa Word, kasi nag-a-attach lang tayo ng ng picture ng pirma. And sa sa questions po later natin entertain yan. After ng short quiz lang. And number 8 po, how long is a digital certificate valid? Nabanggit ko to kanina, pero uulitin na lang din natin to, yung sa validity ng ating digital certificate. So for example, nag-apply ako this year. Gaano kaya katagal yung validity ng aking digital certificate? Yan, may mga sumagot na letter A. Tama ba yan? May sumagot na C. May sumagot na 5 years. Ang tagal naman ng 5 years. Ano kaya ang tama dito? Okay. So may mga na-confuse po dito sa sa validity natin. So ang digital certificate natin is valid for 2 years. So for example po, nag-apply ako this year, nag-enroll na ako ng digital certificate this year at na-issue na yun sa akin, valid siya for 2 years. So ang example natin kanina is ang digital certificate ko 2022, tapos valid siya hanggang 2024. 2 years po yung validity natin. So ano mangyayari kapag nag-expire na? Kunwari lagpas na ako dun sa validity date, ano mangyayari? Kailangan ko ba mag-reapply? Pwede tayo pwede tayo mag-enroll ulit ng panibagong digital certificate. Andun naman yun sa ating account sa PNPKI. Ayan, dun sa portal natin. Pwede natin siya, technically, hindi natin i-renew yung digital certificate kasi once na nag-expire yan, hindi na siya valid. So, kailangan natin mag-apply ng panibagong digital certificate. So, technically, hindi yun nare-renew, pero mag-a-avail tayo ng panibago. Ayan. 2 years po. Yes po. So 2 years yung atin. Then next, according to the e-commerce law, electronic documents shall not have a legal effect, validity, or enforceability as any other document or legal writing. So nakalagay dyan na shall not have a legal effect. True or false? True or false kaya? According to the e-commerce law, an electronic document shall not have a legal effect, validity, or enforceability as any other document or legal writing. So, very good yung mga sumagot ng false kasi dun sa e-commerce law natin, nare-recognize na yung electronic document na meron siyang same functional equivalent as the written document. So parehas lang sila ng legal effect, parehas lang sila ng validity and enforceability. So dito, ang trick word kasi dito is not have. Ito, not, shall not have. Ito yung nakakalito. Dinagdag ko lang to. Pero ang sagot dito is false kasi meron na siyang same functional equivalent as the written document. Ayan. So, imagine, 2000 pa lang, meron na tayong e-commerce law, pero na-push tayo na mag-implement ng PNPKI ngayon dahil lang sa pandemic. Marami na tayong batas para doon. Tapos mas lang natin siya, mas na-implement natin siya dahil sa pandemic po. Ayan. And last question, it is okay to share my digital certificate to other people? Pwede ko bang i-share yung aking digital certificate to other people? True or false? Yan, pwede ko bang i-share? Anyway, sumagot ng DPA, Data Privacy Act. So later yan madidiscuss po. And so ang sagot ng karamihan dito is false. Tama po kayo kasi dapat hindi natin sinishare yung ating digital certificate sa ibang tao. Kasi mamaya may loan na pala na pinirmahan, hindi nyo ma-deny yan. Diba po, ang isa sa benefit ng PNPKI is yung non-repudiation natin. Pag sinabing non-repudiation, we cannot deny na tayo pumirma sa isang document kasi andun yung ating identity as the user or subscriber. So sabi ko nga, kahit yung director namin, siya mismo yung pumipirma sa mga documents kahit sobrang dami pa niyan. Sinatsaga niya pong pirmahan yun kasi siya lang yung owner, siya lang yung user ng kanyang digital certificate. Di niya pwedeng iutos yun sa ibang tao. Kasi mamaya may kontrata na pala yan or loan pala yan, no, na pirmahan. Nagamit pala yung ating digital certificate. Nako, lagot tayo dyan. Oh. Saka yun nga po, dahil nga ang isang electronic document nagagamit na sa mga court cases, ayan, sa mga court cases, di na natin siya pwedeng i-deny. Ay, nagtanong dito, pwede sa question 4. Balik ko lang po saglit. Ang blank ay issued ng certificate authority. So, doon po sa nagtanong sa number 4, ito, binalik ko na lang po. Ang digital certificate ay nai-issue siya ng certificate authority. Ang sagot natin dito ay letter A po. So, tatapusin ko na yung questions natin. So, nakatapos tayo sa short quiz hanggang dito sa number 10. And yung next part na po natin dito is yung sa frequently asked questions naman po. So, dahil nga na-encounter natin palagi at kapag nag-webinar kami, yun din yung na-encounter na question. So, balikan lang din natin ito. Sa first question natin, how much is the application fee for the PNPKI? So kung ano po kung may nag-isip sa inyo, magkano ba yung application natin for PNPKI? Actually, the PNPKI is free. Yung pag-apply natin is free. Yung mismong digital certificate is free. This is offered by the DICT. Siguro kung may tagpipiso kami sa bawat application, mayaman na kami. Pero ano po yan, free lang yan na ino-offer ng DICT. So dapat i-maximize na natin yung libre. Konti na lang yung libre sa mundo, kaya dapat mag-apply na po tayo. And again po, how long is the validity of a PNPKI digital certificate? This is valid for 2 years upon issuance po. And paano kapag nag-expire yung aking digital certificate? Paano ako magre-renew? Should I apply again? Actually, hindi siya nare-renew. Yung mismong digital certificate, hindi siya magre-renew. After siya mag-expire, pwede tayo mag-apply or enroll for a new one. And minsan po kapag wala na talaga tayong access dun sa ating digital certificate sa account natin, pwede tayong mag-submit ng bagong application form. Actually, yung nire-recommend namin is to submit a new PNPKI application form at yung documentary requirements. Baka kasi yung nasubmit natin na IDs before is expired na. Or baka meron tayong changes dun sa ating details sa PNPKI. Kaya much better po na magpasa tayo ng renewal application. So sabi dito, if I already signed a document, can I still edit the content? So sabi po, dapat yung content natin is finalized muna before natin pirmahan yung document. Kasi magre-reflect dun sa ating, kunwari sa Adobe Reader, magre-reflect na itong document na to ay may changes na. Kasi ang isang benefit ng PNPKI is yung integrity. Na i-ensure natin na itong document na to is in the original state. Malalaman natin kung ito ba ay na-tamper, na-edit, ayan, or may changes na. So, ang goal talaga natin is integrity of the document. Ayan. Kaya much better kung yung content is finalized muna po before signing. Ayan. What applications can I use for signing documents? Ang pwede natin gamitin dito is yung Adobe Reader o kaya Foxit Reader. Pwede ba akong mag-sign gamit ang aking phone or tablet? Actually, yung recommended namin talaga dito is yung sa computers po natin. Pwede yung laptop or desktop. Hindi siya ganun ka-responsive kasi sa phone or tablet. Can I install the digital certificate in my work computer? Pwede ba sa work computer? Pwede, as long as the work computer is not shared with other people. Dapat kayo lang po yung gumagamit ng work computer nyo, saka nyo po siya pwedeng i-install doon. Yan. Kasi mahirap naman po kapag share to others yung ating laptop. Diba? Baka kasi sila yung pumirma on our behalf. Mahirap naman din po yun. Is it okay if another person uses my digital certificate? Again, for security purposes po, dapat ang digital certificate natin ay ginagamit lang ng owner at dapat hindi natin siya i-share sa ibang tao. Kasi 'di ba, ang documents signed digitally are now considered as evidence in court cases. So dapat gamitin natin siya responsibly and properly po. And usual concerns, I think hindi siya pwede dito. Hindi siya nagfi-fit in dito sa natin. So, lang tayo. Mag-entertain na lang po tayo ng ibang questions sa Zoom chat. So, kung may hindi pa po tayo na-cover, Sir Joe, pa-help na lang din po sa questions.
All right, so thank you very much, Ms. Mayel, for the presentation of the NPKI and of course the FAQs. No? So on this juncture, we'll proceed po with the question and answer portion po. So we have received several questions po in our chat box. So all right, isa-isayin lang po natin ha. So yung pinakauna po, excuse me. Pinakauna po sa chat box natin kanina pa, no? Si from Michael John Rivera of DOST Region 3. He is asking if available na po ba yung SSL certificates natin.
Ayun, nakamute na po pala. Yes po, pwede tayong mag-apply for SSL certificate. Meron naman din tayo dun sa ating website po.
Ayun, so second question.
Yes, isend ko na lang yung link. Isasend ko na lang po yung link na ng PNPKI dun sa chat. So, wait. Sige po, proceed na lang muna po sa next, sir.
All right. Second question coming from DBM RO3, Sir John Marvin Quindosa po, no? Gaano po katagal ang pagkuha na digital signature daw po? Thank you.
So yung ang processing natin kasi ng individual certificate is within 3 to 5 working days naman po yun. So in case na hindi nyo pa po nakukuha yung account nyo, pwede po kayong mag-follow up. Then, next naman po, sa digital certificate, once na may account kayo, nasa user na po yan, nasa account na yan. Depende po kung mag-enroll na ba kayo o hindi pa po. Kasi once na nag-enroll kayo sa certificate, for approval na lang po namin yan. So nasa ano po yan, nasa user po kung gaano katagal yung pagkuha ng digital certificate. And once na nakapag-apply po kayo, pwede naman din po kayo mag-message sa amin para ma-search na po namin kagad yung inyong details and ma-approve namin yun kaagad.
All right, thank you. Hopefully clear na po yung kay Sir John, no? John Marvin Quindosa po of DBMRO3. Next question po from Kevin Franz Roncal. Acceptable po ba ang digital signature kahit walang date, time, and time zone?
Sa ano po, sa digital certificate po, kahit hindi naman natin i-reflect doon sa mismong pirma, once na na-click natin yung signature po, yung digital signature natin, mag-reflect naman kung kailan po na sign yung isang document. So acceptable po siya kahit sa front natin, hindi nakalagay yung date and time. Basta ang mahalaga po na nilalagay namin is yung label. Mahalaga ang label. Char, dapat nakalagay doon na digitally signed by you, yung pangalan nyo po. Ayan. Kasi kunwari sa documents namin, may mga soft copies. Actually, ni-require sa amin na nakalagay yung label, digitally signed by Bermas Mariel, ganyan. O kaya, digitally signed by Solis Jonathan. So, para lang aware, in case na ma-print yung digitally signed document, at least naka-reflect doon na ito ay digitally signed.
All right.
Okay lang,
So next question po from Mr. Brian Omar Sardia. How can we put visible digital signature to office processing apps like Word or Excel? I think na clarify na din to, no? I think. All right. So yun nga, just to clarify again, yung answer is we're going to use Foxit Reader or dating Adobe PDF Acrobat. Next po is from Mr. Edmund Leharde po of NTC. So nag-apply po kami sa DICT ng batch application for digital signature, but up to now wala pa rin po kami nare-receive or na-receive.
Saan po kayo sa ano po, yung sa NTC, saan po kayo nag-send na email address? O pwede namin i-check yun sa ano po, sa email namin. Kasi ang gamit pa namin ngayon is yung sa LC2 po. Pero baka po kasi na-receive ng central office namin. So ipapacheck na lang din po namin. Ito, NTC Region 3 po ba ito? Sir Edmund?
Sir Edmund, could you clarify on this po? Region 3, correct po ba? I think we'll just chat him na lang, no? Personal chat na lang po so that we could continue on. All right, so from Carlos Sadang of AFAB. So hi, pwede pong magpa-expedite na certificate ko. I think di naging successful yung attempt ko. I responded na sa email ng PNPKI that gave me password and username. Carlos Sadang. So yeah.
Yan, yung may password and username. Siguro ito yung temporary. Tapos, sige po, i-check namin to, Sir Carlo Sadang, sa AFAB. Yan, AFAB region. Yung AFAB, actually may kami na process kami since batch 3. Ayan, so check na lang din po namin ito, Sir Carlo. Yan, thank you po.
Alright, next yung kay DOH, Region 3, kay Site Tolentino. Ano daw sagot sa question number 9 po ba? Is it e-signature document equal to signed hard copy document?
Yes po, based po dun sa electronic commerce law, ang electronic signature po kasi is functional equivalent as the signed hard, yung signature natin on a written document. Kumbaga, ang electronic signature po is equivalent to a wet signature po.
All right. Next would be Sir Gerardo Rubia. or ma'am, Gerardo, maybe sir. Yeah. Kanina sabing hindi nga raw pwedeng i-share yung digital signature. How about sa trusted lang like secretaries ng mga boss? Parang risk of the boss na lang ba to trust his or her authorized person po?
Opo, nasa risk pa rin po yun ng boss kung i-entrust nyo yung digital signature nyo sa authorized personnel po. Siguro magkakaroon na lang po kayo ng internal contract or arrangement with that po. Kasi katulad po dun sa amin, yung regional director namin, siya lang talaga may access ng digital signature niya. Kahit sobrang dami pong letter na kailangan niya pirmahan, siya lang talaga po yung may access nun. Ayan. So siguro nasa risk nyo po. Pero in case na yung document na yun, kahit sign siya ng secretary nyo or assistant nyo at umabot man po yan sa kaso, sa court case, hindi nyo naman siya pwedeng ma-deny na kayo po yung pirmado dun kasi pangalan nyo po yung naka-reflect sa signature na yun. So dahil nga po ang benefit ng paggamit ng PKI is yung non-repudiation, hindi nyo po pwedeng ma-deny na kayo po yung pumirma dun sa document. Kasi kahit na in-entrust nyo yun sa isang secretary nyo po.
All right. So thank you for that clarification. No? So next, DSWD, Kevin France. So do we have rules po sa mga e-signature po? I think maybe he is trying to ask po yun doon on the use po no ng e-signature.
Siguro po kung ang paggamit ng e-signature will also be dependent on the agency po. Katulad sa namin noon, sa mga na-train na or na-orient namin na agencies noon, tinatanong nila, kailan lang ba ako pwede gumamit ng electronic signature ko? So dahil nga po dependent pa rin yan sa agency. Paano ba yung magiging internal arrangement or policies nyo? Dapat meron, in case po na yung agency ay mag-a-apply for digital signature, dapat po meron kayong mga internal policies and guidelines kung paano nyo po gagamitin. So sa part kasi ng DICT, kami po yung nag-i-issue niyan. Pero yung paggamit or implementation pa rin will be dependent on the agency na involved po. So kung mag-a-apply man po kayo, much better po na ma-erase nyo din po yan. Yung sa internal rules na po. Anong documents lang ba yung pwedeng e-signature? Anong documents ba yung kailangan pa rin ay wet signature po?
All right. So second to the last question that we'll entertain, no? Again from Sir Gerardo Rubias. Sino po ang pwedeng mag-apply sa digital signature from DICT? Individual person po ba ay pwede? Private companies po ba ay pwede or government lang po?
Ayan. Sa DICT po, actually, open naman din siya for all. So, pwede tayong as individual person, pwede naman din po yung mga private companies. Kung mag-a-apply po yung isang private company, pwede naman din agency certificate or in behalf of the agency. Or pwede naman po lahat ng personnel mag-apply. Okay lang po. Hindi siya enclosed sa government offices lang. Pero mas encourage po talaga yung government offices na mag-apply.
All right. So
Central office.
sige, last two na lang, last one habol po natin, no? Yung kay Sir Brian Omar Sardea. So meron bang feature yan na password protection before attaching digital signature?
Yes po. Sir Brian, meron po yun, may option tayo to attach a signature before tayo pumirma. Pwede po tayo mag-set ng password para doon. So, depende po yun sa installation natin. Meron kasi kunwari ako, nababother ako kasi parang dagdag time yun. Kapag pipirmahan ko, kailangan ko pa mag-input ng password. Kaya ako po, hindi ko sinet up yung security na gano'n. Pero kayo po, kung mas kampante po kayo na merong password muna before pumirma, okay lang po yun. Masiset up po yun during the installation.
All right. So thank you very much. No. So for any other questions pa po that you have in your mind, so you could just email the official PNPKI email of the ICT region, which which is r3.pnpki@dict.gov.ph. Tama naman po, no, Miss Mayel?
Ayan po.
Yes, all right. Ayun.
Ito po
So
yung
yun po, you could.
website natin. Tapos, meron tayo yung official email namin is nag-change na to r3.pnpki@dict.gov.ph. Although working pa rin naman po yung lc2.support and lc2.info, ano lang, nagbago lang siya kasi nga region 3 na tayo.
All right. So hopefully everyone have taken note po yung ating official email po. And again, for further questions or if ever my agency po na would like to apply po for PNPKI or digital signature, so don't hesitate to contact our team for support on this po. And we have also noted po, no, yun dun sa NTC kanina, ma'am, central office daw po.
Opo, central
Kay Sir
office
Edmund
po.
Laharde. And,
Babanggitin na lang din po namin yun.
and meron din isa
Thank you
nag-direct
po.
chat sa akin po sa OCD3, no? I think they have already passed their batch application. Not sure kung 2021 pa, pero nagpa-follow up
na
din ulit po.
process na din po yun, sir. Sige po. I-double check na lang din po namin sa emails.
All right. So now let's move on to the next part of the program. Thank you very much, Ms. Mayel. So, Sir Jay, now we would proceed to the awarding of the Certificate of Appreciation po. All right. So, Certificate of Appreciation, citation reads, Certificate of Appreciation is hereby awarded to Ms. Mariel Ann Burmas in appreciation for hours of volunteer service as resource person for the 2022 National ICT Month with the theme Spark, Strengthen, Sustain, Advancing the PH Digital Agenda in the webinar entitled DPA and PNPKI, Strengthening and Advancing the PH Digital Agenda. Topic, Orientation on Philippine National Public Key Infrastructure. So given this 27th day of June 2022, signed, Engineer Reynaldo TC, Regional Director of the ICT Region 3. So palakpakan naman tayo dyan, everyone.
Thank you po. Thank you po sa mga umattend. Thank you po, Sir Jonathan Rainier.
All right. So, ayun. So, again, thank you very much, Ms. Mayel. And now we would proceed to the second part of our program, which is the data or the 5 pillars of data privacy, accountability, and compliance. So, hopefully, gising pa po tayong lahat. All right. So, mahaba-haba pa po itong presentation na ito. And now, let me just introduce our second keynote speaker for today. So our second keynote speaker for today is an employee of the National Privacy Commission. She is an attorney at the Enforcement Division of the National Privacy Commission and is also the policy advisor for the business process outsourcing or the BPO industry at NPC. So now let us all give a warm round of applause to our second keynote speaker for today, Attorney Joan Therese C. Medalla.
Hi, good
Attorney?
morning, everyone. Good morning, Jonathan. Sorry, I'm
Morning.
having a little trouble with my video, but later I'll try to fix it. But I'll try to share my screen, and I hope everyone is still alive. Sabi nga, mahaba-haba pa to. So during my talk, you can still stand up, stretch a little bit. So today we will be discussing okay, let's see. I can share my screen. Right. So for today's session, we will be discussing data privacy, accountability, and compliance. So we will focus on the 5 pillars of compliance, but to just make sure that we are on the same page on this, we will be discussing some basics of the DPA. Okay, so let's start with this one. Senator Edgardo Ongara, the former senator, in his sponsorship bill that would become the bill that would be the law that would become the Data Privacy Act, said that in this digital era, information is the currency of power, valuable, coveted, but at a very high risk. So that's really true because now in the time of digital transformation, especially now that we're in the pandemic and a lot of e-commerce platforms have really seen a boom, you really see that information is the currency of power. So what then is your right to privacy? Okay, so your right to privacy is your right to be let alone, which is the most comprehensive of rights and the right most valued by civilized men. Now, in this case, data privacy is the right of an individual to control the collection of, access to, and use of personal information about him or her that are under the control or custody of the government or the private sector. So in this case, data privacy doesn't really mean that you have to keep everything about you private or keep everything about you in secret. You will not tell anyone anything about yourself. What it says here is that this is your right to control, which means that you are given the right to control what information will be shared about you to other people, what information will remain confidential, and so on and so forth. Okay, so now we have RA 10173, or the Data Privacy Act of 2012. Okay. In the Declaration of Principles of the DPA, it says that it is the policy of the state to protect the fundamental human right of privacy of communication while ensuring free flow of information to promote innovation and growth. As you can see here in the Declaration of Principles, there are two seemingly opposing rights. One is the protection of the fundamental human right of privacy, and second, it's ensuring the free flow of information to promote innovation and growth. So these are not conflicting, but you see that in every processing of personal information, there should be a strict balancing of rights. Okay? All right. So the DPA also applies to the government and the private sector to processing of all types of information in the Philippines, and there are some extraterritorial application in certain instances. Okay. So we'll just go through these briefly so we can focus on the compliance aspect. But here, it's what's important to note is that there is an extraterritorial application of the DPA in some instances. If you're familiar, criminal law is generally jurisdictional, which means that we can only cover crimes or acts that happen inside the jurisdiction of the Philippines or within the Philippines. But in some instances, there are extraterritorial applications. The DPA, for instance, allows for this extraterritorial application when the act, practice, or processing of data relates to personal information about a Philippine citizen or a resident. Then the one processing the personal information, for example, a company, has a link within the Philippines, or even if the processing is done outside the Philippines, as long as it is about Philippine citizens. And there are certain instances that concur. For example, a contract is entered in the Philippines, a juridical entity unincorporated in the Philippines but has central management and control in the country, if the entity has a branch, agency, office, or subsidiary in the Philippines, and so on. So what's just important to note here is that in certain instances, we can allow extraterritorial application of DPA even if the processing did not happen in the Philippines. Okay. All right. So there are also some special cases under the DPA in which the DPA shall not apply. But if you can see here, I underlined it. It's only to the minimum extent of collection, access, use, disclosure, other processing necessary for that purpose, function, or activity concerned. Okay. So examples of that would be information of public concern, information for journalistic, artistic, or literary purpose, information for research purpose, information necessary in order to carry out functions of public authority, etc., etc. Okay, so if you can read through these are the special cases in which the DPA shall not apply. But this is a little bit of a misnomer because the DPA still actually applies to these instances. As you can see, it only says but only to the minimum extent of collection, access, use, or disclosure. So the processing of these kinds of information would still have to comply with the principles that I would be discussing later on, the general data privacy principles, as well as um, the implementation of security measures, etc. Okay. All right. Okay, key terms in the DPA. I'm not sure if you're already familiar with these terms, but I'll go through it just so we are on the same page. Okay, so key terms in the DPA, personal information. It refers to any information, whether recorded in a material form or not, from which the identity of an individual is apparent or can be reasonably and directly ascertained by the entity holding the information, or when put together with other information would directly and certainly identify an individual. So what does this mean? It means that you don't need to have the full name. You don't need to have the um each and every description of the person, as long as when put together with other information, it would directly and certainly identify an individual. All right? Examples, name, address, place of work, etc. Okay, now you have what you call sensitive personal information. So under the DPA, there are what we call sensitive personal information, which are protected in greater degree, much more than the personal information. So the list here of what is sensitive personal information is exclusive. So kung ano lang yung nandyan, yun lang ang sensitive personal information. You have your race, ethnic origin, marital status, age, color, religious affiliation, etc. So some people say that the trick here is to remember what are sensitive personal information, and then the rest would be merely personal information. So note here that health is sensitive personal information, especially that we are still in the middle of the pandemic. Education is also sensitive personal information. Religious affiliation, political affiliation, those are all um, sensitive personal information. Okay, so you also have here social security number, because everything, all licenses covered by the government, given by the government, they're all sensitive personal information. So yeah, yung mga driver's license nyo, GSIS, unified UMID ID, everything, lahat ng mga binigyan ng government, that is called sensitive personal information. So your TIN, etc. Okay. All right. Privileged information. Now, these are in all forms of data which, under the rules of court and other pertinent laws, constitute privileged communication. Okay, so we won't go here into detail here, but under the rules of court, there are certain instances wherein data received within the context of a protected relationship would be considered as privileged information. Okay. Data subject, it refers to an individual whose personal information is processed. Now, only natural persons can be data subjects, okay? So the privacy is a fundamental human right, and that's why violations of privacy can only be committed against a natural person. Okay? So yung mga juridical persons like your companies, your corporations, they can file on behalf of their, for example, employees, etc. But still you must prove that there is a violation on the rights of the data subjects. Right. We also have personal information controller versus personal information processor. So if you know this already, just a review. Your personal information controller controls the processing of personal data or instructs another to process personal data on its behalf. On the other hand, your personal information processor is any natural or juridical person to whom a personal information controller may outsource the processing of personal data. So in this case, your personal information controller controls the means and methods of processing. For example, you have your internet service provider. You give your internet service provider all the information that it needs to provide you with good internet service. Then it transfers some of your data to say for example an outsourcing company, or let's say a customer service company. So that would be considered as your personal information processor. So of course, a good example of this would be your business process outsourcing companies, wherein um, some some tasks are outsourced to it. Okay? And they're just merely instructed by your personal information controller to process personal data on its behalf. Okay, so now you also have what we call as processing, which is any operation or any set of operations performed upon personal data. So you can see here, you have the whole data life cycle, which is creation and collection, storage and transmittal, use and distribution, retention, disposal and destruction. So all of these things, the whole data life cycle, that would be considered as your processing of personal information. Okay? So lahat yan, that would be considered as processing. All right. So now you also have your obligations of a personal information controller and personal information processor. So let's go through these briefly so we can go to your 5 pillars of compliance. Okay. So the three main obligations of your personal information controller and personal information processor, that would be to adhere to the data privacy principles, uphold the data subject rights, and implement security measures. Okay. So you have your data privacy principles, which are transparency, legitimate purpose, and proportionality. So lahat yan, if you have to remember all of these things because this is the framework from which you assess each and every processing of personal information. Okay, so again, transparency, legitimate purpose, and then proportionality. All right. So, okay. So you have your transparency principle, which says that a data subject must be aware of the nature, purpose, and extent of the processing of your personal data. Okay. Including the risk and safeguards involved, identity of personal information controller, his or her rights as a data subject, and how these can be exercised. Any information and communication relating to the processing of personal data should be easy to access and understand using clear and plain language. Okay. So what this means basically is that you have to inform your data subject that you're processing his or her personal information, including the risk and safeguards involved, identity of the personal information controller, etc. And usually this is done through a privacy notice, right? So if you notice, say for example, our contact tracing years months back. So before when we were still in higher levels of quarantine, we used to do a lot of contact tracing. So you fill out a form with our personal information and the establishments would be able to collect it. So for the establishment to be able to comply with the principle of transparency, that means that they should have a privacy notice. Okay. Okay. All right. So your next would be your legitimate purpose. It means that the processing of information shall be compatible with a declared and specified purpose, which must not be contrary to law, morals, or public policy. Okay. So it just in this case, it just means that there should be a legitimate purpose for the processing of personal information. In your contact tracing example, what is the purpose for the collection of personal data? It's for contact tracing purposes, right? And that the processing of information is compatible with that declared and specified purpose. Okay. All right. But under section 12, you also 12 and 13 of the DPA, you also have lawful basis for the processing of personal information. Okay, so the first one in that instance is consent. Okay, so consent of the data subject means that he agrees to the collection of the process and processing of his personal information, but it must be freely given, specific, and an informed indication of will. This must be also evidenced by written, electronic, or recorded means. So, which means that implied consent is not accepted in this jurisdiction. It means that you have to sign, you have to opt in, to click an icon, to send a confirmation email. There must be an affirmative action on the part of the data subject. Okay. Okay. So consent means giving data subjects genuine choice and control over how a PIC uses their data. It should not be unbundled from other terms and conditions of a contract, and there must be a clear affirmative action, means someone must take deliberate action to opt in. So implied, implicit, or negative consent is not recognized under the law. So thus a company policy that merely stipulates that inputting of the requested personal information amounts to consent or a waiver by a data subject of his or her data privacy rights shall not be considered as valid consent. Okay, so but we also saw here that the consent should be unbundled. So, for example, you have your terms and conditions, and you have your consent to join the mailing list. Dapat unbundled siya. Hindi pwede na parang you agree to the terms and conditions and then masasama ka na agad dun sa mailing list. Okay? All right. So, dapat maayos din ang inyong mga forms. So, here, in this example, in these examples, these are all faulty consent forms. Kasi this first one, you said that you have agreed to the terms and conditions stated above. Tapos may nakalagay na, we may contact you about products and services you may like unless you click to opt out. Diba dapat nga? There's a clear and deliberate action to opt in. Okay? So is consent always needed? This is the common misconception that when we think about processing of personal information, we always ask, is there consent? May consent ba sa processing of personal information? Kasi kung wala namang consent, di dapat hanap tayo ng other reasons. That's not the case because consent is just one of the lawful basis in the processing of personal information. It's just one criteria for processing both personal and sensitive personal information, it may not always be the most appropriate basis for processing of personal data. And in this case, you should choose the lawful basis that most closely reflects the true nature of the relationship with the individual and the purpose of the processing. Okay? So what are then the alternatives for consent? So for processing of personal information, kasi diba sabi natin, magkaiba ang personal information sa sensitive personal information. So for personal information, you have your contract. For example, you have your contracts with your internet service provider, your contracts with your telephone service providers, etc. Diba? So they have your personal information. You also have your compliance with the legal obligation. So if you're required by law to process the data, vital interests, you also have your national emergency. Okay, so as you've seen in our example on contact tracing, this could fall under compliance with the legal obligation or national emergency. Okay, so what are then the alternatives to consent? Okay, so for the processing of sensitive personal information, so existing law or regulation, if you have existing laws and regulations allowing for the processing of personal information, protection of life and health, public organizations, medical treatment, lawful rights and interests. Okay, so that could be also uh basis for the processing of sensitive personal information. Okay, so this is important, lawful rights and interests. So this is when processing is necessary to protect lawful rights and interests of in court proceedings, in the establishment, exercise, or defense of legal claims, or when provided to government or public authority. Okay, so when you're filing a case against someone, when you're contemplating about filing a case, or you have to defend yourself in court or in other proceedings, then that could be a basis for the processing of personal information, of sensitive personal information. Okay, so another thing to remember is that the processing of personal information is generally allowed. Okay, so as long as meron kang yun yung basis for the processing of personal information. On the other hand, the processing of sensitive personal information is generally not allowed. Okay, with the exceptions of this. So, yan ha, important yan sa framework because pag nakakita ka na okay, this is a processing of sensitive personal information, then at the outset, you know that this is not allowed except kapag may napakita na lang sila na basis for processing. Okay? Proportionality, it means that the processing of information shall be adequate, relevant, suitable, necessary, and not excessive in relation to a declared and specified purpose. Okay? So, in that instance, dapat, kung ano lang yung kailangan na information na ipaprocess for you to be able to achieve that desired purpose, then that's the only information that you will process. Okay. So the question here is that it should be the least restrictive means to achieve the desired purpose. Right. Okay, so now you have your rights of your data subject. Okay, so konti na lang, matatapos tayo sa review and I'll give you a quick break before we proceed to our lecture proper. Okay, so next you have your rights of the data subject. So you have different rights of the data subject. You have your right to information, your right to access, your right to rectification, the right to data portability, the right to object, the right to erasure or blocking, and the right to damages. Okay, so let's try to go back to that. Okay, so your right to information basically just means that you have to give your data subject this information. Okay, so dapat alam niya to when you're processing personal information. The description of the personal data, the classes of recipients of personal data, the purposes of the processing, including direct marketing, the identity and contact details of the PIC, the scope and the methods of the processing, data subject rights, including the right to file a complaint before the Privacy Commission, etc. Okay. So, right to erasure naman or blocking. So, technically, your right to erasure means that you can ask for your personal information to be erased from the system when it is incomplete, outdated, false, or unlawfully obtained. When it is used for an authorized purpose, it is no longer necessary for that purpose, or you withdraw the consent. The processing is unlawful, or the PIC or the PIP violated your rights as a data subject. Okay? On the other hand, yung blocking naman, it's a little bit different from erasure in a sense that you will not completely erase the data from the system. You will just block it. You will just restrict its use because there are still certain issues that need to be resolved. For example, you say that you withdraw the consent, but or sinasabi mo that there's no other legal ground for the processing of personal information. And the personal information controller naman says na, oh, merong other legitimate ground for the processing of personal information. So, hindi pa natin dapat i-alisin ang personal data mo. And nagkakagulo kayo, then as a remedy, you will just block the personal information in the meantime. Okay? Right to rectification. On your other hand, your right to rectification means that you have the right to dispute the inaccuracy or error in the personal data and have the PIC correct it immediately. So, kapag merong mali sa inyong personal data, then you can ask for the personal information to correct it. Okay? If personal data was disclosed to third parties, di ba? Kasi nga, there are instances wherein your personal information controller will share your data to the personal information processor. In that case, the PIC has the obligation to inform your personal information processor of this request. Okay, right to data portability means you have the right to obtain from the PIC a copy of personal data in an electronic or structured format. Okay, so it just means that you can transfer your personal data from one PIC to another, or you can get your own copy of your personal data. Okay. Okay, so right to damages, the data subject shall also be indemnified for any damages sustained due to such inaccurate, incomplete, outdated, false, unlawfully obtained, or unauthorized use of personal data, taking into account any violation of his or her rights and freedoms as a data subject. Okay. All right, and then you have your implementation of your security measures. Okay, so you have your security measures, which is your organizational, technical, and physical security measures. Okay, so madaling tandaan, OTP. Okay, so organizational, technical, and physical security measures. So in this case, it involves implementing policies and programs explicitly intended to ingrain a culture of privacy. So yung organizational security measures, basically, it just means that in an organization, kailangan meron kayong policies and programs aimed for the protection or for data privacy protection, right? So, for example, if you are in the pandemic right now, so dapat meron kayong mga bagong policies now kasi nga nagbago na yung ating mga policies ever since there was the pandemic. Before, we're not really fully digital. We can't work from home. We don't usually do these events online. But now that we're doing it, we have a change in system. So which means that kailangan meron ng organizational security. Okay? All right. Next is you have your technical security measures. So basically, these are just your all your proactive and defensive IT solutions that an organization could employ in securing its data assets. Okay, so for example, your robust firewall and encryption systems, rigorous data access protocols, antivirus, etc. All right, next is physical security measures. Ito lang naman yung inyong mga usual lock and key. Okay? Yeah, so yeah, yung technical security measures, these are examples of your technical security measures. I'll give a copy of the presentation just in case you want to go back to this because I'm not sure if some of you might already know this, but the topic kasi is data privacy, the 5 pillars of compliance. But I'll give this presentation to you. Okay? All right, next is your physical security measures. These are just your physical barriers, conventional key and lock system, electronic key system, etc. Okay. All right. So again, let's go back. What are your 3 basic general data privacy principles? You have your you have your principles of proportionality, legitimacy, C. Okay. Yeah, so you have your proportionality, legitimate purpose, and transparency. And then you have your rights of the data subject, which are your right to access, your right to rectification, right to damages, right to information, etc. Right to erasure or blocking. And then you have your implementation of security measures, which is your OTP, your organizational, technical, and physical security measures. Okay. All right. And then now we go to our lecture proper. So the 5 pillars of compliance. When you try to begin complying with the DPA, ano nga ba yung kailangan mong gawin? Okay? So here we are going to discuss the 5 pillars of compliance. So the first one is to commit to comply, which is to appoint a data protection officer. Later on we will be discussing how this could be implemented. Okay? Second pillar of compliance natin is to know your risk, which is to conduct a privacy risk or impact assessment. Ano nga ba yung inyong privacy risk or impact assessment? Later on, malalaman din natin kung ano yan. Okay? Your third one is to write your plan to create a privacy management program. Okay, so fourth is to be accountable, which is to implement your privacy and data protection measures. And then lastly, to be prepared for breach and to regularly exercise your breach reporting procedure. So maybe after lunch, we will be able to discuss kung ano yung breach reporting procedures, yung ating breach notifications. Okay? So, just for now, these are your 5 pillars of compliance. Yun yung kailangan nyo alamin when you try to begin complying with the DPA. Okay? Alongside your 5 pillars of compliance, gumawa naman din ng NPC ng ating data privacy accountability and compliance framework. So this is just taken from your 5 pillars of compliance, but pinalawak lang niya yung scope na to. Okay? So you start with governance. Ito na, nandito na yung inyong appointment of a DPO. Next is yung inyong risk assessment. Next is yung inyong pag-ayos ng inyong organization. Then, pag-ayos ng inyong day-to-day. Pag-ayos ng inyong data security. Preparation for breaches. Preparation for data sharing for third parties. Management of inyong human resources. Continuity, since pag nagawa niyo na ito lahat, kailangan kayo ng periodic review and to always check your privacy ecosystem. Okay, so let's discuss that one by one. Kasi step-by-step process yan eh, diba? Kapag when we try to begin complying with the DPA, it's a step-by-step process. So we start with number 1, governance. Okay? Okay, so first one muna yung ating governance. Okay? So sabi natin doon sa ating 5 pillars of compliance is to appoint and to choose your data protection officer. But how will you choose nga ba your data protection officer? What to look for in a DPO. So your DPO should have expertise in relevant privacy or data protection policies and practices. He or she should have sufficient understanding of the processing operations being carried out by the PIC or the PIP. Okay? So in this instance, hindi lang dapat yung DPO mo ay magaling sa privacy. Kailangan meron din siyang sufficient understanding of the processing operations being carried out by the PIC or the PIP. Okay? So meron din ditong advisory and NPC Advisory 2017-01, which is the designation of data privacy officers. So I will type in the chat box. Let's see. Okay. Okay. So if you go to our website, privacy.gov.ph, you can see a lot of resources. So dyan, marami kaming mga bagong advisories, mga bagong advisory opinions, circulars, etc. And one of those is ito nga, itong ating designation of data protection officers na makikita nyo dyan kung ano yung mga guidelines natin sa ating designation of data protection officers. Right. So DPOs in government, it is required to have a DPO. Okay. So in this case, it is an individual. The DPO is your individual designated by the head of agency to be accountable for the agency's compliance with the act, provided that the individual must be an organic employee of the agency. Provided further that the government agency may have more than one data protection officer. Okay. So when we say organic employee of the government agency, so dapat plantilla ang ating DPO. So of course, at this point, wala pa tayong position specifically for DPOs in government. So yung ibang agencies, of course, this is already in a concurrent position. Okay? All right, so what to register? So in certain instances, you need to register your data protection officer. But who should register? If you are a PIC or a PIP that employs at least 250 employees, okay, so meron tayong threshold numbers. So kapag PIC or PIP ka na meron kang at least 250 employees, you have to register. If it includes the processing of sensitive personal information of at least 1,000 individuals, then kailangan kang mag-register. Okay? May question dito if dapat senior position or there's an SG requirement for DPOs in government. No, there are no, at this point, wala. But if you look at our if we look at the framework, we will see that dapat ang DPO sana will hold senior positions, at least executive director level in government. Because DPOs, especially when it terms to pag breaches na, may breaches na mangyayari, in that case, kailangan mag-make ng decisions. DPO should make critical decisions on um, immediate decisions on critical issues. So we actually recommend that DPO should be in top management. Okay? Okay, ano pa? Ano pa ang kailangang i-register? Kailan kailangan mag-register? Kapag ang ikaw ay isang PIC na nagpa-process, which is likely to pose a risk to the rights and freedoms of the data subject. So again, in this case, pag government, required kang mag-register. Okay, especially that government always process information of thousands and thousands of individuals. Some government agencies or most government agencies employ at least 250 employees and so on. Alright. So, meron din tayong registration of data processing systems. But right now kasi, yung ating registration ng data processing system is still on hold. Okay? So, ngayon, if you want to register a data processing system, this is just merely voluntary on the part of the PICs and the PNP. Kasi meron kaming ginagawang system which is e-registro na right now is not yet available. Okay? Right. So, non-registration, a PIP or PIC shall be considered as unregistered under the following circumstances. So, pag nag-failure, if you fail to register with the commission, if there's expired na yung license mo and you did not renew registration, rejection or disapproval, revocation of the certificate of registration, etc. Okay, so again, if you will just look at our website, privacy.gov.ph, or if you will follow our social media channels, like kami nagsasabi dito kung extended ba yung registration or kailangan na ba mag-register ulit, etc. Kasi nga, yung currently our system e-register is not yet available. Right? Okay. Next, so after mo nang magkaroon ng DPO, so meron ng person accountable for meron ka ng person accountable for your data privacy concerns kasi meron ka ng DPO, 'di ba? So ang gagawin mo na next is to assess the risk, to see your processing activities. Titignan mo na kung ano ba itong mga processing activities na ginagawa ng inyong organization, just to see a view of it, di ba? So here, important na makita natin yung ating records of our processing activities and then to conduct yung ating tinatawag na privacy impact assessment. Okay? So ano nga ba itong records of processing activities to? So, your records of processing activities basically just means that you're looking into each and every processing na ginagawa ng inyong mga organizations. So, for example, in our organizations, we have different divisions and offices, right? So, in that instance, yung divisions and offices natin, meron silang kanya-kanyang processing na ginagawa. For example, yung HR natin, syempre, nagpa-process sila ng information natin para for hiring purposes or for salary, for payroll, etc. So that's considered as one of their processing activities. Okay? So sometimes meron din tayong mga frontline services that we also collect from the public. Diba? So yeah, that's also one kind of processing activity. So what's important here is to really survey nyo talaga yung buong organization nyo kung ano ba talaga yung mga processing activities na ginagawa ng each division, each office, etc. Okay? So just a guide, ito yung some of the information that you need to know. For example, syempre, given na yung name of organization and the DPO. But, ito, sabihin nyo kung ano nga ba yung name ng inyong data processing system. So, for example, this is your payroll, diba? So, kung payroll siya, ano ba yung data subjects nyo pag payroll? employees, right? So yung purpose of your processing ng information is to provide salaries of our employees, diba? So type of your system, manual ba siya or electronic or both? O sabihin na natin both. Meron kayong manual processing, meron din kayong electronic. Or ngayon bang pandemic, purely electronic na siya, tinanggal nyo na yung processing natin na manual. So kayo lang makakaalam yan. Are you managing as a personal information controller or personal information processor? So, as a company ba, in-outsource nyo ba yung payroll or organic sa inyo yung pag-ayos ng payroll? O, sige natin yan. So, syempre, usually sa government, it's organic. So, you're processing as personal information controller. General information of the system. So, sabihin nyo lang, ano ba yung system nyo? Paano ba kayo nagko-collect ng data for payroll, etc. Description of security measures. So, paano nyo ba pinoprotektahan to? Nasaan ba siya? Nasaang system ba siya? What if may naka-breach dun sa system? Tapos, iba pala yung salary na dumating dito sa isang individual. O kaya naman, hindi dumating yung salaries ng mga employees, etc. Ano nga ba yung description of security measures that you have here? For example, if you only have manual filing, isipin nyo, what if mawala yun? What if magka-bagyo? What if magka-earthquake? 'Di ba? So, ano na mangyayari dun sa manual files nyo? Binack-up nyo ba siya? Nasaan yung backup? Paano kung yung sabihin nyo, oh, yung backup namin nasa computer sa office also? Paano nga 'pag nag-earthquake nasira lahat, 'di ba? Anong gagawin niyo? May backup pa ba kayo? O sabihin niyo parang nasa hard drive. O 'pag nawala yung hard drive, sabihin niyo nasa cloud. O what if nangyari naman sa cloud may ibang naka-access na wipe out yung files. So you have to think about your security measures in each and every processing of your personal information. Okay? So, to whom the personal data is being disclosed to this processing activity? In our earlier example on payroll, kanino nga ba siya na-disclose? Sa land bank ba? Sa ibang companies ba? Etc. So, you're the one, as a personal information controller, you hold that information. Okay? Alright. So, pag nalaman nyo na kung ano yung mga makita nyo, 'di ba? Even lang dun sa exercise natin kanina. Pag tinignan natin yung whole processing activity natin, makikita talaga natin kung saan tayo nagkulang. Kung may kulang ba tayong security measures, ano pa yung kailangan natin gawin dun sa system natin. So, in this case, you conduct a privacy impact assessment. Okay? So, what is a privacy impact assessment? Okay, your PIA is a process undertaken and used to evaluate and manage impacts on the privacy of a particular program, project, process, measure, system, etc. Okay, so it takes into account the nature of the personal data protected, the personal data flow, the risk to privacy and security posed by the processing, current data privacy best practices, the cost of security, implementation, and where applicable, the size of the organization. Okay. So in this case, basically your privacy impact assessment just identifies and provides an assessment of the various privacy risks and proposes measures intended to address them. 'Di ba dun sa ating 'di ba dun sa ating dun sa ating example kanina, um, nakita na natin kung ano ba yung mga risks involved. So in that instance, makikita mo na kung ano yung risk in the processing of your personal information. Okay? Your privacy impact assessment shall also include a systematic description of the processing operations anticipated and the purposes of the processing. Okay? An assessment of the necessity and proportionality of the processing in relation to the purposes of the processing. So, di ba, kapag nalaman nyo na ano nga ba yung purpose ng processing ito, tapos nakita nyo, ito ba yung mga information na kinokollect natin in relation to that processing. So, you also have to make an assessment kung yung mga lahat ba ng information that you are processing is necessary to achieve that desired purpose. And then lastly, assessment to the risk and rights and freedoms of the data subject. Okay. Next is all right. Okay, so next is you have your control framework for data protection. Okay, so in this case, 'di ba, na-identify mo na kung ano yung mga risks mo. So in this case, ang control framework na mo naman is your enumeration of the measures intended to address the risk identified in the PIA, including organization, physical, and technical measures to maintain the availability, integrity, and confidentiality of your personal data. So in that case, dapat yung control framework mo will be able to address the risks identified in your PIA. But in this case nga, yung control framework mo, syempre dapat ma-take into account rin niya yung kanyang nature of the personal data to be protected, the risk represented by the processing, current data privacy best practices, and cost of security implementation. So, 'di ba? So kung if it were up to us, 'di ba, sobrang isa-secure natin yung ating mga systems. But in that case, we also have to check may cost ng ating security implementation. Meron ding depende kung malaki ba yung agency natin or maliit lang, maliit ba yung budget natin or malaki. Ano ba yung information that we are trying to protect? Okay? Alright, so again, if we start dun sa ating compliance framework, we start with number one, yung ating appointment of a DPO. Tapos after natin mag-appoint ng DPO, nagkaroon na tayo ng ating records of the processing activities and nagkaroon na rin tayo ng privacy impact assessment. So, ano na yung next na gagawin natin? Is, after nun, after mong ma-identify lahat yun, kailangan magkaroon ka na ng inyong privacy management program and privacy manual. Okay? So, these terms are interchangeable, but it just means that you have to write it down. You have to write kung ano yung inyong mga policies and programs. So, the NPC, as you can see in this slide, is an ISO certified organization. So, 'di ba sabi nga sa ISO, pag hindi nakasulat, parang wala lang 'yan. So, dapat meron kang privacy management program and privacy manual na available kapag kailangan ng inyong mga employees. Okay? Alright. Next is that after nun, your privacy by the way, your privacy management program and privacy manual should contain all your security measures. So that would contain your records of your processing activities. It will also need to contain yung mga privacy impact assessment and your policies and programs. For example, if you have your bring your own devices policies, dapat nakalagay yon. Kung meron kang CCTV policies, dapat nakalagay din yon. So, kayo as an organization, you will be the one to know kung ano ba yung mga policies and programs nyo that intended for data privacy and protection. Right? Next is meron ka namang day-to-day. Okay? So, for day-to-day naman, meron kang privacy notice. You have to have your data subject rights. You have to protect your data subject rights on a daily basis and to protect personal information throughout the whole data life cycle. Okay? So, yung privacy notice mo, okay. So, yung privacy notice mo, di ba sabi natin, it shows transparency. Because your privacy notice is a statement that gives information to the kind of the processing activities that you do as an organization. And then it just gives information to the data subject. It shows transparency and fairness in the processing of your personal information. Okay? So, yan. Pag nasulat na natin yung ating privacy management program and privacy manual, on a day-to-day basis, kailangan, ginagawa natin ito. Kailangan meron tayong privacy notice, kailangan ina-uphold natin ng data subject rights, at throughout the whole data life cycle, we protect personal information. Okay? And then, on the other hand, data security, kailangan meron din tayong organizational, physical, and technical security measures. Okay, so organizational, physical, and technical security measures in place. Okay, so in that case, on a day-to-day basis, kailangan gina-uphold din natin itong mga ating organizational, physical, and technical security measures. Okay, next one is to manage breaches. So later on, we will be discussing yung ating NPC Circular 16-03 on personal data breach management. But we'll go towards, we'll discuss a little bit of that in this part. Okay. So there is a difference between a security incident and a personal data breach. Okay, so if you already know about this, and this is just a review for you, but a security incident is merely an event or occurrence that affects or tends to affect data protection or may compromise the availability, integrity, and confidentiality of personal data. It shall include incidents that would result to a personal data breach if not for safeguards that have been put in place. Okay. So basically, your security incident does not, okay, so involve personal data. Okay, kaya security incident lang yung tawag sa kanya. Okay, so there's an example in a 2018 case decided by the commission, the National Privacy Commission. So, ang facts of the case is that during a meetup event, okay, the company found a potential security incident when the Wi-Fi login credentials of its network were shared with the event participants. Okay? According to the commission, this is a security incident as it did not involve personal data. So, kasi nga ba, ano nga ba yung na-share? Wi-Fi login credentials lang yung na-share. Okay? So, in that instance, it does not involve personal data. Nasabi natin kanina kung ano ba yung personal data. Okay? So, in that instance, according to the commission, this is just merely a security incident. Okay? But on the other hand, even if it's just a security incident, this might lead to a personal data breach. Okay? Kasi nga, if merong nakaalam ng kanilang Wi-Fi login credentials, it's possible, no? What if yung next naman na malaman nung person na to is yung inyong mga login sa inyong internal servers, etc. So sabi ng commission, you still have to submit your full breach report and you still have to submit your security incident management policy. Okay? Right. So, ano naman ang ating tinatawag na personal data breach? Okay? So, kapag personal data breach naman, this is what you call your breach of security leading to accidental or unlawful destruction, loss, alteration, unauthorized disclosure of, or access to personal data. Okay? So, here, meron kang accidental destruction, unlawful destruction, loss, alteration, unauthorized disclosure, unauthorized access of personal data. So kung meron yan, meron lahat yan. Kung mayroon, alter yung data, nawala yung data, nagkaroon ng unauthorized disclosure, unauthorized access, etc. That would be considered as a breach. Okay? So kasi pag may personal data involved. Okay, so there are three types of breaches. The first one is your availability breach, which results from loss, accidental, or unlawful destruction of personal data. Integrity breach, okay, so availability breach, nawala yung data, and then you don't have backups, etc. So that's availability breach. Integrity breach, if there's alteration of personal data. For example, later on we'll be giving examples. And then next, you have your confidentiality breach. Okay, so confidentiality breach resulting from the unauthorized disclosure of or access to personal data. Okay, so you have your confidentiality breach is actually the most common type of breach here in the Philippines. Okay, right. Examples of availability breach, diba? So meron kang lost or stolen laptops, paper records stolen from insecure recycling or garbage bins. I saw a question a while ago on disposal of data. So later on, we will be answering your questions during the open forum. But here, it could, kung wala kang proper disposal of personal data, pwede ka rin magkaroon ng availability breach because paper records can be stolen from insecure recycling or garbage bins. Or loss of contents of a website. For example, hacker just totally wipe out the contents of the website and you don't have backup data. Right? Examples of confidentiality breach, I said that this is the most common. So, ang daming information. you sent out details to the wrong address, hard disk drives and other digital storage media being disposed of or returned to equipment lessors without the contents being erased. If the database was hacked, if employees access or disclose personal information outside of the requirements or authorization of their employment, then that is confidentiality breach. Okay. All right. So integrity breach, you also have some examples of your integrity breach. An attacker changes data without proper authorization, incorrect credit card details due to inadvertence, incorrect phone number registered for OTPs, diba? Your OTPs or your one-time passwords. So those are examples of your integrity breach. All right. So for managing data breaches, diba? Kanina sinabi natin na meron ka dapat privacy management program and privacy ban. So included doon sa inyong privacy management program or privacy manual is your security incident management policy, right? So in this case, dapat meron ka ring policy in order to protect yourself from breaches or to outline the things that you will do if nagkaroon ng breach. Okay? So first one, syempre, doon sa ating security incident management policy is prevention. Okay? So you have to, ang nakalagay dapat doon is your implementation of your organizational, physical, and technical security measures. Okay? So in that case, dapat nakalagay din dyan kung ano nga ba yung inyong mga organizational, physical, and technical security measures intended to prevent or minimize the occurrence of a personal data breach and assure the timely discovery of a security incident. Kasi hindi naman pwedeng sabihin natin na, okay, we're not going to report this breach because we did not know that the breach happened. Okay? So dapat meron ka ring policies and programs to ensure that there is a timely discovery of a security incident. Okay? Next, ano pa dapat ang laman ng ating security incident management policy? Kailangan meron din tayong implementation of an incident response procedure. Okay? So intended to contain a security incident or a personal data breach and restore integrity to the information and communications system. Okay? Okay. So, kailangan ma-mitigate din yung possible harm and negative consequences to a data subject in the event of a personal data breach. Okay. So, the data breach response team, diba? Ito yung sinasabi ko kanina when we answer the question na sana ang DPO ay dapat nasa top management. Okay? Ang sabi natin, because a data breach response team must have at least one member with the authority to make immediate decisions on critical actions. Later on, we will be discussing notification, breach notification. And in that case, makikita natin na time-bound siya. So in that case, dapat there shall be a team that shall be responsible agad to report immediately to make decisions on critical actions. Okay? So your data breach response team is responsible for the implementation of the security incident management policy, the management of security incidents and personal data breaches, and compliance with the data privacy law and other issuances. Okay? So dapat meron ka ring tinatawag na ating preventive mitigation measures. Okay? So ayan, so ito yung mga preventive mitigation measures nyo, 'di ba? Sinabi na natin kanina yung inyong conduct of your PIA. Dapat sinabi na rin natin na meron ka dapat data governance policy, meron kang appropriate security measures, you need to monitor security breaches and vulnerability scanning of computer networks. You also have capacity building of personnel and procedure for the regular review of policies and procedures, including the testing, assessment, etc. Okay. All right. So ngayon, okay na? Natapos niyo na? Nagkaroon kayo ng managing of breaches. Ano naman yung next na gagawin niyo? Okay? Yung next naman na gagawin niyo is your third-party relationship. Okay? So meron ka ring third-party relationships with other individuals. For example, you have data sharing agreements, you share data with other companies, or you outsource naman your your data to other companies, and there are also cross-border transfer agreements. So in that case, kailangan you also have to protect these relationships. Okay. So there's a difference between an outsourcing agreement and a data sharing agreement. Right? So first, for outsourcing agreement, this is between your personal information controller and your personal information processor. Diba? So kanina diniscuss natin kung ano nga ba yung inyong personal information processor. So first, kung meron kang personal information controller to your personal information processor, then that would be considered here. Okay? Right? Next. Okay. Yeah. So subcontracting is actually allowed under the DPA. So it says here, personal information controller may subcontract the processing of personal information. Okay. Next is you have your data sharing agreement. On the other hand naman, yung data sharing agreement mo is between your personal information controller to another personal information controller. Right? So kanina dun sa ating outsourcing agreement, meron kang personal information controller to personal information processor. Pag data sharing agreement naman, meron ka lang personal information controller to another personal information controller. Okay? So, what is an example of this? Kasi kanina alam natin na yung pag sa outsourcing agreement, DPOs agad yan, diba? On the other hand, pag data sharing agreement, paano nga ba? Paano nga ba itong data sharing agreement to? Okay? So, say for example, you have travel agency. So you have a travel agency, and the travel agency nyo shares your personal information to the hotels or to the airlines, diba? So itong hotels, airlines, and travel agencies mo na to, they're all personal information controllers. They process your personal information. They process your personal information because of their own businesses, diba? Depending on the needs of their own businesses to provide you with specific services. So in that instance, they're all personal information controllers. Okay? Right. So next is you have to manage HR. So you have your trainings and certifications in that instance. Wait lang. Right. So here, kailangan meron kang capacity building. So it's also good that you're doing this because you can capacitate yourself. You can learn more about the DPA, or you can review what you know about the DPA. Right? So meron ka rin tinatawag na security clearance and NDA. So diba yung security clearance, you only grant access to an employee when the performance of his or her function directly depends on and cannot otherwise be performed unless access to personal data is allowed. So, in that case, diba, parang kung meron tayong data centers, depende lang dun sa use case basis lang siya. Meron din tayong NDA, yung ating non-disclosure agreement, which is a legal contract that outlines the confidential materials, knowledge, or information that the parties will share with one another. Okay? Next is your continuity. Okay? So in that instance naman, continuity assessment and development. Okay? So, here, hindi pwede na natapos mo na yung PIA mo, okay na yon. So, never mo na ulit gagalawin yung PIA mo. Okay? Hindi. Kasi nga, di ba, our organizations are alive. Hindi naman yan static. So, in that case, we always have to review and update our privacy policies and programs. For example, now, nagka-pandemic, nag-iba yung ating mga policies and programs. So, dapat magkaroon din tayo ng bagong PIA. We have to review our contracts to update our privacy manual. Tapos, nagkaroon ng return to office. O ano nang mangyayari? ano nang mangyayari dun sa ating mga programs and policies na bumalik na naman sa office? Eh di, ibahin na naman natin. Or hybrid workforce na ba tayo ngayon? So, see, all of these things, when they happen, they also affect our privacy journey. 'Di ba? So, in that case, we always have to continually assess and develop our privacy programs. Okay, so yes, I will give a copy of this presentation to the ICT, and then hopefully they will share it with the participants. Okay. All right. So next, you also have your privacy ecosystem. Okay? So hindi lang natin dapat i-update yung ating nangyayari sa ating organizations. We also have to look outside organizations kasi every day may bago na sa ating technology, marami ng bagong legal requirements. So the legal counsel or the legal department must always keep itself abreast of any or all policy developments involving data privacy. So particularly those issued by the NPC. Okay? So I gave you our website, privacy.gov.ph. And in that case, marami talaga kayong makikita doon sa ating website na mga bagong advisories, etc. Okay? Right. So, okay, we still have time to discuss personal data breach management. So, I'll discuss it now para kung sakali, baka hindi na tayo kailangan ng bumalik after lunch. Okay? So, personal data breach management. Right. Sinabi na natin as a review kung ano ang security incident. The important thing to remember is that in security incident, there is no personal data involved. Okay? So kapag meron ng personal data involved dyan, then that's no longer a security incident. That's already a personal data breach. Okay? Yan. So a data breach is also a security incident, but it leads to an accidental or unlawful destruction, loss, alteration, etc. And it compromises the availability, integrity, or confidentiality of personal data. Okay? Right. So, yan, meron kang tinatawag yan, confidentiality breach, integrity breach, availability breach, which we've discussed a while. Right. So, di ba, diniscuss na natin kanina yung ating security incident management policy, which is the one that is implemented by the PIC for the purpose of managing security incident, including personal data breaches. Alright. So, ano nga ba yung ating parts of a security incident management report? Okay. So, in this case, kailangan meron kang creation of a data breach response team. Diba? Pag sinulat natin yan, dapat alam na natin. Sabi nga natin, dapat preventive. So, dapat, pag sinusulat na natin yung ating security incident management policy, kailangan alam na natin sino nga ba ang ating data breach response team, sino yung ating head, sino yung ating DPO, sino yung ating part ng technical team, kailangan ba may part dyan ng legal team, ilalagay nyo kung sino ang inyong data breach response team. Ilalagay nyo rin kung inyong mga incident response procedure. Diba? Sabi natin, dapat alam mo, meron kang mechanism in order to ensure timely discovery of breaches. So, for example, yung breach ay nangyari sa Division A. Paano siya malalaman ng data breach response team? Ano yung inyong processes? Kunyari, employee A ba ng Division B, sabihin niya dito, kanino niya sasabihin? Sabihin ba niya agad meron bang privacy focals per division? Meron ba kayong tinatawag na compliance officers for privacy per division? Tapos sasabihin niya doon, tapos sasabihin nitong compliance officer of privacy kay DPO. Paano ba yung procedure nyo? Right? Next is dapat nandiyan din yung ating documentation and reporting requirements. So, dapat nakalagay na dyan, kailan ba kayo magre-report sa NPC? Kailan ba kayo mag-notify sa mga data subjects nyo? And then lastly, you also have to regularly review and improve your policies. Okay? So, laging nandiyan yung regular review and improvement of the policies. So, ayan. So, ang data creation of a data breach response team, di ba? Sabi natin, it must have at least one member with authority to make immediate decisions on critical actions. And it shall be responsible for compliance with the security incident management policy, management of security incident and personal data breaches, and compliance with data privacy law and other issues. Right. So, responsibilities of the incident response team. So, ano nga bang gagawin ng incident response team nyo? Dapat meron silang procedure for timely discovery of security incidents. So, in that case, dapat malalaman agad nila kung ano kung kailan ba nagkaroon ng breach, ano bang nangyari. Okay? So, ano yung procedure? Anong gagawin nila? Of course, sila yung mag-evaluate at mag-investigate breach. Sila rin yung mitigate ng damage caused by the breach. Sila rin yung magko-communicate with law enforcement, third parties, and data subjects. Okay? Sila rin ang kailangan may alam ng compliance with reporting requirements to the NPC and to the data subjects. So, dapat kailangan rin na i-document yan at kailangan meron din tayong incident response procedure. Okay? Anong gagawin nila pag nagkaroon ng breach? Okay, so first, syempre, preliminary assessment. Identify first the responsible persons for assessing the incident. Sino nga ba ang mag-root cause analysis niyan? You determine the criteria for involving law enforcement. So, kailan ba tayo tatawag ng law enforcement agencies? NBI, PNP, saan ba? Your procedures to secure evidence, contain the incident, and restore the integrity. Okay? So, it depends yan. I'm not an IT person, but in that case, you have to secure the evidence. You have to contain the incident and to restore the integrity of the system. Okay? So, full investigation and evaluation of the incident. And then you also mitigate the harm. Okay? So, this is very, very important. You have to mitigate the harm caused mo sa inyong data subject. So, kung kailangan i-shut down muna yung system, i-limit muna yung access dun sa system to individuals na kailangan lang talaga, pwede yun. Okay? Next is yung documentation and reporting requirement. So, dapat i-document din nila para in the future, you will be able to prevent this. Right. So, notification and other requirements. All right. So, in certain instances, there's a requirement to notify the NPC, the National Privacy Commission, and the data subjects kapag nagkaroon ng breach. Right? So, in that instance, kailan nga ba? When is notification required? Okay? So, in the first place, notification is only required when there is a personal data breach. So, pag security incidents, hindi yan kailangan i-notify. Kailangan lang nating i-document yan. Okay? And then, i-submit in an annual report. But, pag personal data breach, kailangan tayo mag-report in certain instances. Hindi sa lahat, pero in certain instances. Ano nga ba itong mga instances? Okay? So first, if it involves sensitive personal information or any other information that may be used to enable identity fraud. Okay? So if it's sensitive personal information or it can enable identity fraud, like for example, your bank details, diba? So that could be a criteria for notification. Okay? Next is information may have been acquired by an unauthorized person. Okay? So if it's an authorized person na nakukuha information, then that could be considered as a breach. For example, if it's outside your organization. Diba? Next is unauthorized acquisition is likely to give rise to a real risk of serious harm to any affected data subject. Okay? So in this case, usually the commission is always saying na, diba, nagkakaroon din naman talaga ng risk sa data subjects ang any breach lang sa data subjects because it is in their best interest to know that a breach occurred. Okay. When in doubt, there are other considerations. The first is data that would likely affect national security, public safety, public order, or public health. If this is data of at least 100 individuals, data required by applicable laws or rules to be confidential, or data of vulnerable groups. Okay. Next is who should notify. Okay, so who should notify? Personal information controllers should notify. Sabi natin, 'di ba dito meron tayong personal information processors, okay? But in general, still the personal information controller is the one that is required to notify. So kapag ang breach nangyari sa personal information processor side, kailangan niyang sabihin sa personal information controller, and the personal information controller will notify. Okay? When notification should be done within 72 hours upon knowledge of or upon reasonable belief that a personal data breach has occurred. So yan, sinasabi ko kanina na merong, it's time bound. So in this case, since time bound siya, 72 hours, which is just 3 days, kailangan talaga you have the DPO, which is capable of making immediate decisions on critical actions. But here, di ba sabi natin, hindi mo siya pwedeng itago na, oh, hindi ko alam na nangyari yan. Kasi kailangan reasonable belief that a personal data breach has occurred. Okay? And also, this could be based on available information. Okay? So, kung 72 hours, ito lang yung information na meron ka, then that's what you provide to the commission. Okay? Next, when delay is allowed, okay, so you have to determine the scope of the breach, you have to prevent further disclosures, you have to restore reasonable integrity to the system. So delay is allowed. However, delay is actually usually not allowed. Okay? Kasi ayan, when delay is prohibited, at least 100 data subjects, diba? Pag ganyan na. Harm or adversely affect the data subject, hindi rin pwede delay. Okay? Contents of the notification. So, pag nag-notify ka sa data subject, ano nga ba? Ano nga ba yung inyong okay, ano nga ba yung contents ng inyong notification? So, dapat alam mo kung ano inyong nature of the breach. Okay, so una, i-describe muna how the breach occurred and the vulnerability of the data processing system that allowed the breach. Chronology of events. So, di ba, may history ka. Paano ba nalaman? Ano bang nangyari? Bakit ba nagkaroon ng ganitong klase na breach? Okay? Next is you have your approximate number of data subjects or records involved. Okay, so dapat alam mo din yan. Kung ilan ba yung data subjects that is that are affected. Ano nga ba yung nature of the personal data breach? Description and likely consequences of the personal data breach, name and contact details of the data protection officer, etc. Okay, so dapat alam mo din yan na meron ka ring dapat personal data possibly involved. Okay, so pag nalaman mo na kung ano ba yung nature ng breach, diniscuss mo na siya. Yan, lalaman nyo na kung ano na yung pwede nyo ilagay dun sa ating personal data possibly involved. So, meron bang sensitive personal information involved? Meron bang information involved that may be used to enable identity fraud? So, ilalagay nyo dyan. Okay? Measures taken to address the breach. By the way, these are all taken from NPC Circular 16-03, which is also available on our website. Because I know that right now, di ba, parang di mo alam paano bang ilalagay mo dyan. Pero pag nagka-breach, you can look at NPC Circular 16-03. You can also incorporate that in your security incident management policy to guide you kung ano nga ba yung inyong contents na dapat malagay nyo sa inyong personal data breach notification. Okay? Next is that kailangan ilagay nyo rin kung ano nga ba ang inyong mga measures taken to address the breach. In that case, di ba, sabi ko nga, kailangan meron kayong damage mitigation. So, kailangan sinasabihin nyo na dyan, ano nga ba yung mga measures na ginawa nyo so far to address the breach? Paano nyo ba sinecure or na-recover nyo na ba yung personal data that were compromised? Okay, so minitigate nyo na ba yung possible harm or negative consequences nito sa mga data subjects? Na-inform nyo na ba yung data subjects after the incident? Or ano ba yung mga measures taken to prevent a recurrence of the incident? So yan, this is very, very important. Lagi yung tinatanong ng commission kung ano nga ba yung mga measures taken to prevent another recurrence of the incident. Okay? Next, content, you need additional information that may be shared. Okay. Failure to notify. There's failure to notify. It is presumed if the NPC is not notified within 5 days and it triggers an investigation into the breach. Okay? So sa ating penalties kasi, meron tayong tinatawag na concealment of personal data breach. So itong concealment of personal data breach, this is criminal in nature. So if reportable breach naman pala siya, tapos hindi ka report to the commission, then that could trigger an investigation into the breach. Okay? Right. So, next, diba, notification of data subjects. You also have to notify the data subjects based on similar circumstances. So, aside from notifying the commission, you also have to notify the data subjects. Okay? Okay, annual report, 'di ba? Sabi natin, ang security incidents ay hindi naman nire-report. Okay? But you still have to document it. You still have to document yung ating mga security incident, and then after that you will compile that and submit it through what we call this annual report. Okay? So, annually, you will submit kung ano ba yung mga security incidents na nangyari sa inyo, and hindi na kailangan as detailed, di ba? Parang yung ating personal data breach, it is very detailed. So, ang annual report, hindi naman na masyadong kailangan na detailed siya. Okay? Alright, so that ends yung ating presentation ng ating 5 pillars of compliance. Let's go back again to the compliance framework, just to review, and maybe I can answer some questions. Okay. So, yeah, again, yung ating 5 pillars of compliance, diba? Sabi natin, commit to comply. And kanina we discussed kung ano nga ba yung ating um, requirements for data protection officers, requirements sa ating registration of data protection officers, and requirements for data protection officers for government. Next, discuss din natin kung paano ba know your risk into conducting a privacy risk or impact assessment, diba? So we discussed kung ano nga ba yung ating PIA. We started with a description of yung ating records of the processing activities, and ano nga ba yung gagawin natin sa PIA natin, and ano nga ba yung tinatawag nating control framework, diba? Next is that we discussed yung ating writing our plan, which is creating a privacy management program. So, sabi natin, meron tayong privacy management program or privacy manual in which ilalagay natin doon, isusulat natin doon kung ano nga ba yung ating mga policies and programs directed for data privacy. Okay? Next is that we also said that we have to implement our privacy and data protection measures. So, here, di ba sinabi natin, meron tayong organizational, technical, and physical security measures for the protection of personal data. So, on the other hand, meron din tayong day-to-day na kailangan i-protect din natin ang ating mga rights of the data subject. So, madami tayong rights na dinaanan kanina, yung right to access, right to information, right to rectification, right to damages, etc. And every day, sabi natin, kailangan igagawin natin siya. Okay? So, here dun sa ating be accountable, sinabi din natin na meron tayong privacy notice. So, every day, dapat in-implement din natin yung ating mga privacy notices. Okay? And then lastly, sabi natin, meron tayo, be prepared for breach and to regularly exercise our breach reporting procedure. So, at the outset, sinabi natin na before a breach happens, kailangan meron ka ng security incident management policy. Okay? So, before a breach even happens, dapat yung iyong security incident management policy, nandiyan na yan. Meron ka ng data breach response team na ready, meron ka ng incident response procedure. So, alam mo na kung anong gagawin mo. Meron ka ng processes in order to ensure timely discovery of breaches. And then, kapag nangyari yan, alam mo na kung ano ang inyong gagawin. And here, sa ating managing data breaches, meron ka ring notification requirements. Okay, so in certain instances, you have to notify the commission and the data subject. So nakalagay naman dyan yung ating contents of the notification, kung ano nga ba yung dapat laman ng ating notification sa data subjects, including yung personal data involved, mitigation measures sa ating personal data, contact details of the personal information controller or personal information processor. Kailangan yan na nandyan yan sa ating notification sa data subjects and notification to the commission. We also said na yung ating security incidents hindi naman kailangan nire-report but should be documented and submitted into an annual report at the end of or at the start of the year, at the end of every year. Okay, so wala pa namang distinct procedure on annual security incident report. Okay. All right. So, sabi ko nga, maikli lang yung talk on 5 pillars of compliance. So, maybe we can try to start with our open forum. I see some questions here.
Hello.
Yes. Hello.
Yes, attorney. Let me just ask po muna, are we going to continue na with the forum or later after lunch na po?
Kayo, ako, I can continue para hindi na tayo babalik after lunch. We can if okay with you, we can try to extend a little bit kung maraming questions.
All right. But attorney, for the presentation proper, okay na po lahat.
Yes. Okay. So this is the 5 pillars of compliance. Ito lang naman, 'di ba, yung pinapa-discuss yung 5 pillars of compliance, tama ba?
Yes po. All right. Thank you, attorney, for discussing. It's a very, very a lot of information siguro dun sa ating mga NGAs, LGUs, and GOCCs who are with us today, no? And we also have several questions here with us. Sir J, are you available na po, Sir J? Ayun. Okay. So let's proceed na po siguro with the open forum. If anyone still has their questions po, you could just chat it on our chat box below and we'll have it accordingly po. So first, ma'am, Attorney Joan, there is a question from Michael John Rivera po, no? So first is DPO should also, maybe his question is, should the DPO be a senior position or are there any SG requirements daw po?
Okay, yeah. So I answered that question during my talk. So sabi ko parang although right now wala naman talagang nakalagay na dapat may SG requirement ang DPO or meron senior position siya, but doon sa ating guidelines for appointing a DPO, it says there na the DPO should be independent. So first, independent siya in making decisions. So in the sense like how will you interpret independence? So first of all, sana yung DPO natin ay hindi nandoon sa may mga heavy processing activities. For example, HR, finance, 'di ba? So yan mga heavy processing activities yan na you would see na baka doon magkakaroon ng breaches, 'di ba? So in that case, kapag heavy yung processing activities, malaki yung mahirapan maging independent yung ating DPO. Yung ating DPO kapag nagkaroon na ng breaches. And the next, sabi natin, ang ating data breach response team ay meron dapat person who can make immediate decisions in critical actions. So, in that case, sana executive position siya. So, sana yung ating DPO ay nasa top management for them to be able to make immediate decisions on critical actions. Kasi isipin mo, yung breach natin, hindi naman yan weekdays only. So, kapag ang 72 hours nangyari on a Friday, nagbibilang na tayo dyan. And in that case, dapat, meron kang team, yung DPO mo should be able to make immediate decisions on critical actions. So, we recommend na executive position siya. So, in the NPC, our DPO is our executive director.
All right, so I hope that was made clear po, no, Sir Michael. Excuse me. So next we'll go to DOH Region 3, Site Tolentino po. So how long does DPO store your personal information? After po nila ma-process yung na-provide na data, what do they do with it? Then lastly, store or delete after a certain period of time po.
Sige, I'm also reading the question. Okay, so then my next question, there should be a data retention destruction policy in place. Okay, this is correct. There should really be a data retention and destruction policy. But at the outset, 'di ba, meron ka dun sa inyong risk assessment. So, pag nag-risk assessment kayo, makikita niyo na diyan kung gaano niyo ba dapat dun sa risk assessment niyo, sa records of your processing activities, sa inyong privacy inventory, data inventory, dapat nakalagay na dun kung gaano niyo ba siya katagal i-store yung inyong personal information. And dapat may basis, okay? So, for example, you only need this information for contact tracing. So, in that case, ano nga ba? Tignan nyo dun sa laws ba natin, dun ba sa Bayanihan Act as 1, dun ba sa ating joint memorandum circulars with DTI, DOH, meron bang nakalagay doon na retention mechanisms? Kasi, baka naman under the law, meron kang, you have to keep certain information, up until a certain point, 'di ba? So usually, pag may ganun, edi hanggang dun mo siya i-keep, 'di ba? Kung wala naman, and you see what is reasonable, kung contact tracing siya, 14 days ba is enough, or kailangan mo ba na mas matagal, like mga 60 days to be able to check pa rin your record. So pwede mo namang ilagay doon kung kailangan meron ka munang, alam mo muna kung until what point mo siya i-store. You cannot store it forever. In that case, for example, usually yung iba nga ang ginagawa nila, it's 10 years because it's by law, di ba? Ang statute of limitations natin, 10 years for legal claims, etc. So yung iba nilalagay nila na 10 years. Yung iba naman shorter period. Yung iba naman, even if sabihin natin na 10 years, do you really need all this information? Baka pwede na disaggregated ang data, baka pwede na statistical data na lang, and you don't really need all of these information na information as is. Okay, so yun, dapat una muna talaga meron kang alam mo kung until what type mo i-keep yung inyong data. And then how do you dispose of the data? Okay, so you have to dispose it. Yung iba, like meron para tayong National Archives Law of the Philippines. Yung iba, they also have provisions on destruction of data for government agencies. But the most important thing here is you should be able to destroy or destruct your personal information na hindi na talaga siya ma-access pa ulit, diba? So sometimes, diba, I think our IT personnel even said na even if i-delete mo siya, ilalagay mo siya sa recycle bin mo, your computer can still access it. So at that case, hindi pa rin yun totally na-destroy yung personal information. Okay? But usually, pag NPC, kapag naghihingi yan ng proof of destruction of personal data, ang hinihingi lang yan affidavit. Affidavit nung nag-delete ng personal information na wala na talaga yan sa systems nila, walang backups, etc. Okay?
All right. So hopefully that has clarified po the questions of Sai Tolentino and Mark June Kahayo. No? Now let's proceed with again Mr. Michael John Rivera. So how about cloud services? What are the considerations in availing cloud services as server for your information systems po? Especially daw if the supplier of the cloud service is outside the jurisdiction of the Philippines or international supplier.
Okay. Okay, so for cloud services, usually kasi ang General Data Protection Regulation or the GDPR, um which is the successor of Directive 95. And Directive 95 is the predecessor of the DPA. Okay, so medyo magulo. Yung DPA natin, yung ating data protection uh yung ating Data Privacy Act of 2012 is patterned from Directive 95, okay, of the European Union. And ito namang Directive 95 na to, ang subsequently naging General Data Protection Regulation. So, yung GDPR, sometimes we also use it because it can explain some of the provisions of the in the Philippines. But right now kasi wala tayong vendor management. Ang GDPR ay merong tinatawag na um, vendor management and third-party privacy risk assessment. So, here, ang sinasabi lang naman dun sa vendor management natin is, yung GDPR, it requires businesses collecting data to put appropriate agreements in place. So, first of all, kailangan titingnan nyo yung contracts nyo. So, titingnan niyo muna kung meron kang vendors outside is to check your contracts and to check if merong appropriate organizational, technical, and physical security measures yung ating cloud services, 'di ba? Yung ating cloud services. Titingnan natin kung kasama ba siya dun sa ating best practices, ginagawa ba niyang kanyang organizational, technical, physical security measures in line with current best practices based on the organization. And then next is paano pag nagkaroon ng mga breaches. Kailangan in that case meron din kayong provisions doon sa inyong contract na paano sasabihin sa inyo ng cloud services kung merong breach. Kung may nangyari, kailangan meron kayong timely discovery of all incidents. Kasi kahit na meron kayong providers, ang personal information controllers ay may duty of accountability, which means na hindi mo pwedeng sisihin yung cloud provider mo na, kasi yung cloud provider ko, hindi sila nagkaroon ng enough security measures, yan tuloy nagkaroon ng breach sa data ng aking mga data subjects. So, hindi pwede yun. Kasi as a personal information controller, you are responsible for the data that you handle. Okay? So you also have to check yung inyong contract. So basically really ang vendor management is to really check yung nitty-gritty of the contract and to check whether yung contract mo has all the provisions that would comply with the DPA. Yung iba pa nga more. Yung iba pa nga kasi ang GDPR is stricter than the DPA. So yung iba pa nga even if contracts dito entered in the Philippines, minsan stricter pa yung provisions nila with their vendors to comply with the GDPR. Kasi nga, sometimes, like for example, if us as a government, as a company, we are also processing data of European citizens. Pag ganun, pasok na siya sa GDPR. So, in that case, mas stricter na yung requirements. Okay? So, next is that you also have to check ano pa yung mga possible yung pwedeng gawin sa inyong mga vendors. Titingnan nyo ano ba yung ina-allow nyo na information sa vendors nyo. Ano ba yung mga binibigay nyo na information. And dapat at that point, meron kayong lahat security measures in place. Yung iba naman kasi like yung mga vendors natin sometimes konti lang, like hindi naman whole processing activities natin yan, 'di ba? So I think better nga 'yun, better na yung vendor natin is specific. Unless you want na yung buong system mo talaga is really outsourced outside. So that one is a bit risky, although it's very practical, but at the same time very risky kasi binigay mo na sa isang provider yung whole system mo. Kaya nga actually in government, you can also try to see it in our website, the security of personal information in government. I think that is NBC circular. I'm gonna try to look at it. Security of, ang sabi nga niya na dapat sana ang government agencies will have its own data center para it will it can nandun na nakatago yung lahat ng kanyang personal data. Of course, pwede rin naman tayong mag-cloud, but at the same time, at least we have our own data center na hindi tayo nakadepende lang sa isang cloud service provider. Okay, so I hope that answers the question. Okay, so any other questions? We still
All
have a
right.
bit more time. I think we can extend.
Yep. One not question siguro, or yeah, question din naman to. Could they receive daw a copy of the presentation po,
Yeah,
Tony?
sure. Definitely. I'll send a copy after yeah.
All right, ma'am. I have one more question direct message to me, no, from Sir Carlos Sadang of AFAB. So based on the presentation, what are the only information we are allowed to collect? Could you please cite all possible examples?
Okay, kung ano yung pwede nyo i-collect na personal information. Okay, let's see. Generally, ito yung common misconception with the DPA. Sabi kasi natin, 'di ba, minsan naririnig nyo, marami tayong naririnig na ganyan. Pag merong information na gustong ilabas, sabihin nila, hindi ko pwedeng ilabas yung information na yan because bawal sa DPA. Sabi, hindi pwede to sa DPA. That's a common misconception. Kasi nakita naman natin dun sa ating start of the presentation, sinabi natin na there is a balancing of rights, 'di ba? Sabi natin, the Declaration of Principles, the state promotes the free flow of information while protecting the right, or the state protects the fundamental human right to privacy while promoting the free flow of information and growth. So here hindi mali na ang conception na ang perception natin is that collection of personal data is not allowed. Okay? It is allowed subject to certain requirements. So, if you collect yung inyong personal information, I think this question, nangyari itong question to kasi diniscuss ko na generally, ang collection ng sensitive personal information ay not allowed. Okay? So, but ang collection ng personal information, lahat ng personal information, it will be allowed kapag nag-comply ka sa data privacy principles of transparency, proportionality, and legitimate purpose, kapag meron kang implementation of your security measures, kapag in-uphold mo yung rights ng data subjects, and kapag meron kang isa sa mga lawful basis for the processing of personal information. Okay? Pag sensitive personal information, generally hindi allowed. But at the same time, pwede ka pa rin mag-process ng sensitive personal information as long as meron kang lawful basis, 'di ba? Diniscuss natin yung ating lawful basis of the processing of personal information. Yan, 'di ba? Ito, processing of sensitive personal information, sinabi natin, pag existing law or regulation, inallow ka ng law to collect this information, pwede. Protection of life and health, pwede. Kung part ka ng isang NGO, ng non-government organization, public cooperative, etc., pwede ka rin mag-process ng sensitive personal information. Medical treatment, pwede ka rin mag-process. Lawful rights and interests, yung discuss ko kanina, kung meron kang court proceedings, etc., pwede ka pa rin mag-process ng sensitive personal information. Kapag may consent ang data subject, inallow ka niya to process yung inyong personal information, allowed ka din. Okay? So, I hope that when you go out of this lecture, hindi mo iisipin na hindi nyo iisipin na bawal mag-process ng personal information or bawal mag-process ng information because of the DPA. Okay? Ang sinasabi lang natin dito is dapat mag-comply ka sa certain requirements. Okay? So, ang sinasabi lang kasi natin kanina is pag sensitive personal information, dapat mas careful tayo. Kasi generally, hindi allowed na mag-process with the exception of this list. Okay? So any other questions? I hope that answers it. And you can ask me follow-up questions kung hindi pa rin malinaw.
So as of this moment, Attorney Joanna, wala na po akong nakuha questions. But if there are any more questions, you could just raise your hand or you could just chat in the chat box below po. Meron pa po ba kaya? Anyone? So if wala na po, or if may hahabol pa po, no, we could just relay all your questions naman po to Attorney Joanne po. Alright? So at this juncture, Sir Jay, we'll have po muna siguro another photo opportunity naman po with Attorney Joanne. So hopefully po, everyone could open their camera for another very fast naman po, photo opportunity po with Attorney Joanne. So for the evaluation link po, no, after this, the awarding of certificate, we're going to be sending it in the chat box and also presenting it on screen. So abang-abang lang po. All right, so meron pa po bang habol? We have 3 pages, no? 5 pages na po pala ngayon, 5 pages. All right, sige. Sir G, pa-assist na lang din po ako for the screenshot po. Sige, hold your smile lang po. We have 5 pages po. Let's go with page 1.
Sa akin po, 3 pages lang po. Page 1 po, 1, 2, 3. Okay, next page po natin. Okay, baka may habol pa po sa kanilang mga camera. 1, 2, 3.
All right, so thank you, Sir J. Okay na po yata. And thank you everyone for opening your videos for our short photo opportunity with Attorney Joanne po. And at this juncture, Sir J, may you present our PowerPoint presentation na po, no? We will be awarding the certificate of appreciation po, of course, to our keynote speaker, Attorney Joanne Therese Medalla po. All right. All right, so certificate of appreciation citation reads, certificate of appreciation is hereby awarded to Attorney Joanne Therese Medalla in appreciation for hours of volunteer service as resource person for the 2022 National ICT Month with the theme Spark, Strengthen, Sustain, Advancing the PH Digital Agenda. In the webinar entitled DPA and PNPKI, Strengthening and Advancing the PH Digital Agenda, under the topic of 5 pillars of data privacy, accountability, and compliance. So given this 27th day of June 2022, signed by Engineer Reynaldo TC, Regional Director of DICT Region 3. So again, thank you very much, Attorney Joanne Therese Medalla, for very much sharing your knowledge and time for this very comprehensive, again, webinar for all of our NGAs, GOCCs, LGUs, etc., who are with us here today. So palakpakan muna natin, everyone. All right. See. Now, for our closing remarks naman po, or closing message, let us all welcome po Engineer Petronilio S. Villafuerte po, the TOD Chief or Technical Operations Division Chief of DICT Region 3.
To everyone who have attended this webinar, a pleasant day to all of you. Before we officially end today's webinar, On behalf of the entire DICT Region 3, headed by our ever-supportive Regional Director, Engineer Reynaldo TC, we are elated for taking your time to join us in this occurring month-long celebration of the 14th National ICT Month, and we truly appreciated your engagement in this webinar. We hope that with this session, you have acquired essential digital skills and knowledge that would get you equipped for the thriving digital transformation of this ICT era. As with this year's ICT Month theme, Spark, Strengthen, Sustain, Advancing the Philippine Digital Agenda, we hope that we have sparked your ICT wheel and prowess in this digital exponential growth, strengthened your level of technological engagement through these distinct discussions, and sustain the blaze and vibrant of the Philippine ICT ecosystem through fueling the learning drive and capacitating digital and professional skills of each of us and every Filipino. As the DICT believes that in the long run, Filipinos are the ones who would ignite and kindle the flame and growth of the ICT agenda and the sector. Also, I would like to thank and show my appreciation to our caliber resource speaker who has shared knowledge, expertise, effort, and time in today's engaging discussions. We are truly grateful for the unwavering support you have given to the National ICT Month celebration of the DICT Region 3, and to all our partner institutions, stakeholders, and collaborative teams. We thank you, as this webinar would never be a success without your continuous and vigorous joint effort. Ultimately, to our very own DICT Region 3 program committees, the project teams, regional and provincial staff, with their focal persons and efficient and reliable team members, we appreciate your collaborative efforts in organizing this enthralling event. Truly, this has empowered the ICT wheel of each individual and would indeed prepare them for the growing digital economy. To all the webinar attendees, we thank you for being part of the occurring ICT Month celebration. Should you have more concerns or suggestions, you may send us a message or connect with our project focal persons and provincial officers. Moreover, you may follow our social media sites for more training, webinars, and other promising activities. Again, on behalf of the entire DICT Region 3, Happy National ICT Month, fellow Filipinos. Mabuhay po kayong lahat.
Thank you, Sir Nilo, for the closing remarks. And now, the most awaited part of our program, the attendance and post-evaluation link po. So, the link is shown on your screen and will also be posted po on the chat bar. So, yun po. Again, the attendance or post-evaluation link will be valid until 4 p.m. po, no? So, kindly answer the attendance and post-evaluation link for the necessary awarding of certificate for everyone who has joined us today. So once again, thank you very much, Attorney Joanne, and we hope to see you again in the next batch of webinars. Thank you very much for your time. Also for our participants, thank you very much for attending this webinar. Hopefully we have given you enough knowledge for how we handle security measures po, especially in DPA in our organizations po. And we hope to see you with our future webinars po. On Wednesday, we will be having another set of PNPKI and Data Privacy Acts and its IRR po. This is open for mainly the private enterprises or the private or the general public in short. All right, so we hope if you have anyone who would like to attend, they could just register for it. The registration link is still open. Yes, someone is raising. Ma'am Grace? All right, so for those who are already done with filling up the attendance or post-evaluation form, they could already leave this meeting. And again, happy lunch to everyone, and hopefully we would see you in our future activities or future webinars of DICT. Thank you always for patronizing our event, and stay safe, everyone. Thank you. Thank you very much.